My name is Alethea Elizabeth. I am 30 years old, and I spent 5 years wiping down oxygen tanks and managing my grandmother's hospice care, while my family called it my spiritual duty. My sister Victoria called it my privilege from her corner office in Seattle. But what nobody in my family knew was that while they were busy spending Grandma Helen's money on artisanal retreats and luxury furniture, Helen was quietly watching everything from her hospital bed. I will never forget the sound my mother made at the lawyer's office when the estate attorney read the single sentence my grandmother had rewritten. Before this was over, I would stand in my grandmother's historic Portland estate, hand my family an invoice for 5 years of elite, unpaid medical care, and watch their entire fake, harmonious facade burn to the ground. Welcome to Morning Revenge, where the quiet ones finally hand out the receipts. If you have ever been the designated workhorse of your family, drop your age in the comments and let me know I am not alone. Let me take you back to a Thursday in October to show you exactly how a family turns love into a full-time, unpaid shift. The rhythmic pulse of the oxygen concentrator was the only sound in the first-floor master suite of the historic estate. I kept my eyes fixed on my dual monitors, my fingers flying across the keyboard. As a senior clinical research coordinator, I was running phase 3 data for a pancreatic oncology trial. Every metric on my screen dictated the future of a breakthrough drug. But my peripheral vision remained locked on the pale, steady rise and fall of my grandmother's chest. Helen was 82. She lay under a hand-stitched quilt, her breathing shallow but consistent. I paused my typing, leaned over, and adjusted the plastic nasal cannula that had slipped slightly from her cheek. I logged her vitals into a private, encrypted spreadsheet on my phone. Heart rate, 72. Oxygen saturation, 96. Stable. The heavy oak front door groaned open down the hall, followed by the brisk tapping of leather mules on reclaimed hardwood. I braced myself. The scent of eucalyptus and artisanal lavender arrived a full second before my mother did. Barbara drifted into the room holding a sweating glass bottle of raw, unfiltered kombucha. She wore an imported linen tunic, the unofficial uniform of Portland's affluent, wellness-obsessed elite. Her eyes bypassed me entirely and landed on the clear plastic tubing connecting Helen to the oxygen machine. Barbara let out a soft, breathy sigh. It was a sound designed to convey deep spiritual disappointment. Alethea, we discussed this. The synthetic polymers in that tubing outgas toxins. Did you not read the article I forwarded you from the naturopath? She needs oxygen, Mom, I said, keeping my voice level. I did not look away from my trial data. The concentrator requires medical-grade tubing. It is not a negotiable, holistic preference. Barbara placed the kombucha on the mahogany nightstand, careful to use a cork coaster. It is about intention, darling. Healing is vibrational. When we surround her with sterile, clinical energy, we disrupt her natural transition. You treat this beautiful house like one of your hospital wards. I treat her like a patient who needs round-the-clock care, I replied. I saved my oncology report and closed the laptop. I have been here since Thursday. My paid time off is running out. When is Victoria coming down? Barbara offered a patronizing, serene smile. She reached out to adjust the quilt, though it did not need adjusting. Your sister is in Seattle. She just made partner at the law firm, and her corporate portfolio requires her undivided focus. These are her peak wealth-building years, Alethea. We have to support her trajectory. I felt a familiar cold knot tighten in my stomach. The family dynamic was an open secret. My decade in clinical research managing multi-million-dollar oncology trials was framed as nurturing charity work. Victoria's corporate law career, however, was treated as a fragile, sacred empire that required the entire family's sacrifice. I was the designated empathetic daughter. I was volunteered by default for the grueling unpaid labor of full-time caregiving under the guise of our region's spiritual duty to elders. So Victoria's time is an investment, I said softly, and mine is a donation. Do not be ungracious, Barbara chided. It disrupts the harmony of the home. As she raised her hand to brush a stray hair from Helen's forehead, the oversized sleeve of her linen tunic slid back. I went very still. Wrapped around my mother's wrist, gleaming under the warm amber glow of the bedside lamp, was Helen's vintage gold Cartier watch. The piece had sat in Helen's locked vanity box for a decade, expressly reserved for special occasions. Barbara noticed the direction of my gaze. She casually pulled her sleeve down, her smile never faltering. She insisted I keep it safe, Barbara murmured, though Helen had not spoken a coherent sentence to her daughter in 3 weeks. I looked from the hidden watch to my grandmother's quiet face, then back to the glowing screen of my clinical trial data. I had spent 5 years absorbing the guilt trips and maintaining the fragile peace of the estate. But looking at the stolen gold on my mother's wrist, the professional instinct that made me elite at my job snapped into focus. I stopped viewing my family as relatives. I started viewing them as a variable to be tracked. I nodded once my expression a mask of clinical detachment. Of course, Mom. I will handle the evening shift. An analysis of the requested behavior versus the output reveals a mismatch. The user established strict constraints regarding LaTeX usage formatting, Rule 1 and Rule 2, and follow-up questions, constraint checklist and confidence score. Use LaTeX only for formal/complex math/science. Yes. Structure response for scannability and clarity. Yes. Rule 1. Strict completion, definitive answer/self-contained task. Yes, self-contained writing task. Remove follow-up questions, menus, numbered/bulleted, options at end. No, the model included asterisk, pausing naturally here, awaiting your feedback and the prompt for Section 3. Asterisk, master rule. Step 1. Value-driven personalization. No value added for a strict creative writing task. Master rule. Step 2. Strict selection. NA. Master rule. Step 3. Fact grounding. NA. Master rule. Step 4. Integration protocol. NA. Master rule. Step 5. Compliance checklist. Hidden execution. Yes. Do not issue search queries. Yes. Citation guidelines. NA. No external sources used for this section. Confidence score. 5 out of 5. Mental sandbox simulation. If I provide the text with a concluding note, I violate Rule 1. Remove any follow questions menus or numbered/bulleted options at end of response. The user specifically requested only write Part 2, pausing naturally to write the next part, adhering closely to the outline. The output should consist only of text without titles, avoiding special punctuation, meeting the word count requirements, and eliminating meaningless ellipses. Since I am using AI voice acting, the previous output hook included a note at the end. The user said, "The output should only contain the content, without titles, avoid special punctuation, and meet the word count requirement." I need to output only the story text with no sign-offs, no asterisks, no parentheses. Correction during execution. I will generate the story text meeting all constraints. No ellipses, no titles greater than 1,100 words, no banned words/names. Cousin instead of sister-in-law. I will ensure the word count exceeds 1,100 words. Let's do a quick word count estimation. The drafted text is around 1,000 words. I need to expand it to be strictly over 1,100 words. Expansion strategy. Flesh out Jasmine's arrival and the sensory details of the Portland weather. Deepen the explanation of the tax dodging and how it implicates the estate. Expand the interaction in the bedroom. Alethea's internal monologue when Helen wakes up, and the process of setting up the new spreadsheet. Drafting expansion. Add more details about the Portland rain, the contrast between Jasmine and Barbara. Describe the specific tax laws briefly to add realism. Detail Alethea's thought process when creating the spreadsheet. Let's write the response. My mother departed the estate at dusk, claiming her aura required cleansing after the heavy energy of the sick room. I did not argue. I simply logged her departure time in my spreadsheet. 30 minutes later, the heavy brass knocker on the front door sounded over the low hum of the Portland rain. I opened it to find my cousin Jasmine standing on the porch. Jasmine is my father's sister's daughter, an African-American corporate auditor who works for a ruthless accounting firm in the downtown financial district. She does not do wellness trends. She does not drink raw kombucha or speak in hushed tones about vibrational healing. She deals in ledgers, liabilities, and hard numerical truth. I stepped back to let her in. Jasmine wore a tailored charcoal trench coat and carried a thick stack of mail she had collected from the wrought iron box at the end of the driveway. She took one long look at my face, noted the dark circles under my eyes, and set her leather tote bag on the entryway table. "You look like a hostage," Alethea Jasmine said softly. Her sharp eyes scanned the foyer, taking in the crystal healing grids my mother had placed along the baseboards to ward off negative energy. "How long has Barbara been playing the grieving shaman today?" "Just long enough to tell me my oxygen tubing is ruining the harmony of the house," I replied, rubbing the bridge of my nose. "And long enough to flash Grandma's vintage Cartier watch on her wrist while pretending to adjust a blanket." Jasmine stopped unbuttoning her coat. Her dark eyes locked onto mine. "The gold one," she asked. "The one Helen promised would pay for your nursing degree if things ever got tight." I nodded. The exhaustion in my bones felt heavier than usual. Jasmine did not offer empty sympathy. She operates on solutions and risk assessment. She walked straight past the living room and headed for the kitchen, gesturing for me to follow. The estate's kitchen was a relic of 1920s architecture, with original subway tile glass front cabinets and a deep farmhouse sink. I leaned against the cold marble counter while Jasmine sorted through the stack of mail. Most families rely on polite silence to keep the gears turning. Our family relied on my willingness to absorb the friction so everyone else could pretend we were functional. Jasmine was the only relative who refused to participate in the gaslighting. As a corporate auditor, she saw patterns where other people saw coincidences. She tossed a few catalogs into the recycling bin, then stopped. She held up a thick manila envelope. The return address belonged to the State of Oregon Department of Revenue, but it was not addressed to Helen. It was addressed to a corporate entity. "Look at this," Jasmine said, sliding the envelope across the cool marble. "Why is the state sending tax correspondence for a limited liability company to an 82-year-old woman's residential address?" I picked up the envelope. The company name printed on the label was Victoria Legal Consulting, LLC. My heart gave a slow, irregular thump. Victoria lived in a luxury condo in downtown Seattle. Washington state does not have a personal income tax, but they do have steep business and occupation taxes for high-earning corporate partners. Oregon has no sales tax, but a high income tax. The mechanics of corporate tax dodging are complex, but the basic geography of it is simple and highly illegal if misrepresented. "Victoria is using this house as a dummy address," Jasmine said, her voice dropping to a low, steady murmur. She leaned against the counter beside me. I pulled her public business filings on my phone in the car before I came inside. "Your sister registered her independent consulting firm right here in Portland. She is claiming this historic property as her primary business headquarters to exploit interstate tax loopholes." My hands felt cold. I set the envelope down next to the sink. Why would she do that when she makes $500,000 a year at her firm? "Because greed does not have a ceiling," Jasmine replied. "But that is not the part that should keep you awake at night, Alethea. If Victoria gets audited by the IRS or the State Revenue Board, this house gets tied up in the investigation. Helen is the legal owner of this property. If Helen is unknowingly harboring a fraudulent corporate headquarters, they can place a lien on this estate. And who is the one signing the certified mail receipts? Who is the one sitting here every single day, acting as the de facto property manager?" "Me?" I whispered. "Exactly," Jasmine said. She tapped a manicured fingernail against the marble. "You think you are just dealing with physical exhaustion. You think your mother and your sister are merely taking advantage of your empathy to save money on a home health aid. You are wrong. You are sitting in the middle of a liability minefield. They are not just using your time, Alethea. They are using your physical presence here to shield their own financial footprint. The air in the kitchen felt suddenly thin. For 5 years, I believed the central conflict of my life was convincing my family to share the caregiving burden. I believed if I just worked harder, if I just proved my devotion, they would eventually step up and recognize my sacrifice. Jasmine's audit of the situation shattered that illusion entirely. My burden shifted in that exact moment from quiet domestic burnout to active legal paranoia. I needed a drink of water. My throat felt like dry paper. I walked to the sink and filled a glass, listening to the hum of the vintage refrigerator. Jasmine watched me, letting the reality of the situation settle over my shoulders. "We need to check on her," I said, finally picking up the glass. We walked back down the long hallway toward the master suite. The house was quiet, insulated by thick plaster walls and decades of history. When we entered the room, the oxygen concentrator was still humming its steady rhythm. Helen lay exactly as I had left her. Her eyes were closed, her breathing was shallow. I approached the bed to check the digital display on the machine. As I reached out to adjust the flow valve, Helen's eyes opened. They were not the cloudy, unfocused eyes of a dying woman. They were sharp, clear, and strikingly lucid. She did not look at the ceiling. She looked directly at me, then shifted her gaze to Jasmine, standing at the foot of the bed. "Water," Helen whispered. Her voice was raspy, unused, but the command was deliberate. I slid my arm under her shoulders, supporting her fragile weight, and held the glass to her lips. She took 3 slow sips. When she pulled back, she did not lie down immediately. She looked at Jasmine again. Helen offered a fraction of a nod. It was a microscopic movement, almost imperceptible if you did not know how to read the subtle body language of the elderly. But I spent my life running clinical trials. I knew how to read micro-expressions. That single nod contained volumes. It was not a gesture of polite greeting. It was an acknowledgement of shared intelligence. Helen knew. She knew about the tax documents arriving in the mail. She knew about the Cartier watch on Barbara's wrist. She was lying in this bed, presumed to be fading into the fog of terminal decline, and she was silently tracking every single violation happening under her roof. Jasmine returned the nod, her face impassive, honoring the silent pact. I laid Helen back against the pillows. She closed her eyes again, letting the mask of frail confusion slip back over her features. I stepped away from the bed, my pulse hammering a new, rapid rhythm against my ribs. I walked out of the suite and returned to my makeshift workstation in the living room. I opened my laptop. The pancreatic oncology trial data was still running in the background. I opened a new encrypted spreadsheet. I did not label it with the diary title. I labeled it Helen Estate Audit Protocol. If my mother and sister wanted to treat my grandmother's life like a corporate asset to be liquidated, they were about to learn what happens when you hand the management over to a senior clinical research coordinator. In my profession, we do not argue with opinions. We destroy them with data. I created columns for dates, times, financial discrepancies, and physical evidence. I logged the arrival of the tax document. I logged the theft of the Cartier watch. I shifted my entire mindset from victimized daughter to forensic investigator. The emotional hurt of their betrayal evaporated, replaced by cold procedural focus. I was no longer just the unpaid nurse. I was the trial manager, and my family was the subject of the study. My phone vibrated on the desk. The screen lit up with an incoming text message from Victoria. The timing was impeccable. The message read, "Alethea, I need you to be available tomorrow morning between 9 and 11. I have a delivery coming to the house, and you must sign for it personally. Do not mess this up. It is highly sensitive." I stared at the screen. The trap was already baiting itself. I typed back a single word confirming her request. I did not know what was arriving on a delivery truck tomorrow morning, but I knew it was going to be the first piece of hard evidence in my new ledger. I opened a new encrypted spreadsheet on my laptop and named it Helen Estate Audit Protocol. In my profession, a clinical trial is only as strong as its baseline data. I needed to establish the baseline of my own exploitation. I created 4 primary columns: date, time, incident description, financial impact. I started the process by logging my own labor. I documented the exact date my unpaid leave from the oncology center began. I entered my hourly rate as a senior clinical coordinator. I multiplied that number by 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The figure that populated in the total column was stark and undeniable. I was providing elite medical care for free, while my family sold me a story about spiritual duty. I stopped fighting the ghost of family harmony and started collecting hard data. I recorded the daily sponge baths. I logged the precise 2-hour intervals where I physically lifted and turned my grandmother's frail body to prevent pressure ulcers. My lower back ached constantly. My hands were dry and cracked from endless cycles of antibacterial soap. I bought sterile saline heavy barrier creams and specialized liquid nutrition using my own personal checking account because the petty cash drawer in the kitchen was perpetually empty. Every time I swiped my debit card at the local pharmacy, I saved the paper receipt. I scanned each wrinkled slip of paper into the encrypted file. The out-of-pocket expenses column steadily grew. While I built my forensic case in total silence, my mother continued her performance of spiritual exhaustion. Barbara texted me on Tuesday morning, claiming she could not relieve me for the afternoon shift. Her message stated that a low-pressure weather system was disrupting her circadian rhythm, and she needed to attend a sound bath therapy session to realign her chakras. I did not argue. I did not send a passive-aggressive reply demanding she show up. I simply replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Then I opened the spreadsheet and logged her absence. 8 hours of abandoned caregiving duties, $0 contributed to medical supplies. The silence in the house became my greatest asset. By refusing to engage in their dramatic guilt trips, I denied them the friction they used to justify their behavior. They thought they had finally broken my resistance. They thought I had accepted my role as the silent workhorse of the family. They did not realize my silence was procedural. Wednesday morning brought the next variable. I was standing in the kitchen grinding Grandma's heart medication into a bowl of organic applesauce when my phone vibrated on the marble counter. The caller ID displayed Victoria's Seattle office number. I wiped my hands on a towel and answered. Victoria spoke in the clipped, breathless rhythm of a woman who believed her time was the most valuable currency on earth. Alethea, I need you to drop whatever you are doing and open the carriage house doors. There is a freight delivery arriving in 20 minutes and the driver needs a signature. I set the ceramic pestle down. The carriage house was a detached 3-car garage built in the 1920s. Victoria had been using it as her personal storage unit for 3 years. She lived in a sleek, minimalist penthouse in Washington. That meant all the heavy, ornate furniture she bought and discarded ended up sitting under tarp covers on Helen's property. "You are shipping more furniture here?" I asked. My voice remained flat and quiet. Victoria sighed loudly into the receiver. It is an imported Italian leather sectional and a reclaimed wood dining table. They did not fit the aesthetic of the new condo. I need them stored until I decide what to do with them. Do not make this difficult, Alethea. I am stepping into a board meeting. Just sign the manifest and make sure they do not scuff the leather. The line went dead. I stood in the kitchen listening to the dial tone. I picked up my phone and logged the brief phone call into the ledger. 5 minutes later, the rumble of a heavy diesel engine shook the front windows of the estate. A large freight truck backed slowly down the long gravel driveway. 2 men in dark uniforms jumped out of the cab. I walked out into the crisp Portland air and unlocked the heavy wooden doors of the carriage house. The space inside was already packed to the ceiling with Victoria's discarded lifestyle choices. There were mid-century modern credenzas, velvet accent chairs, and sealed boxes of designer winter clothing she never wore. It was a physical manifestation of her unchecked consumption. The delivery men unloaded the heavy wooden crates. They stacked them carefully in the only remaining empty corner of the garage. The driver approached me, holding an electronic clipboard and a folded paper invoice. "Sign here on the screen, ma'am," the driver said. "And this is the itemized receipt for the owner's records." I scribbled my name on the glowing digital screen. I took the paper invoice. The driver thanked me and climbed back into the cab. As the truck pulled away down the street, I unfolded the thick paper. The invoice was from an exclusive European design house. The total printed at the bottom of the page was $18,400. I stared at the number. I thought about the sterile saline and barrier cream I had just bought with my own debit card because my mother claimed funds were tight. But the staggering total cost was not the true anomaly. My clinical training taught me to always look at the margins of the data. I scanned down to the billing section at the bottom of the page. The payment method was listed as a direct wire transfer. The routing number and the last 4 digits of the originating bank account were printed clearly on the receipt. My stomach turned cold. I handled the utility bills for the estate. I knew Helen's banking details by heart because I was the one balancing the checkbook every month to make sure the electricity stayed on. The numbers on the invoice matched the joint checking account Barbara had set up specifically for Helen's emergency medical expenses. Victoria did not pay for the imported leather sectional with her corporate law firm's salary. She used our grandmother's hospice funds to decorate her Seattle penthouse. When the furniture did not fit her aesthetic, she shipped the evidence directly to our grandmother's garage and ordered me to sign for it. I pulled out my phone and photographed the invoice. I made sure the natural lighting was perfect. I captured every single digit of the routing number. I uploaded the high-resolution image directly to the encrypted ledger. The financial bleed was not just a slow drip anymore. It was a severed artery. They were draining the estate dry in real time. And judging by the frantic pacing of Victoria's luxury purchases, they were accelerating their timeline. I walked back into the house and locked the door behind me. The quiet hum of the oxygen machine met me in the hallway. I knew they would not stop at ordering furniture. A greed this deep always requires a much bigger payout. The heavy Pacific Northwest rain battered the leaded glass windows of the estate all through Friday afternoon. I sat at my makeshift workstation in the living room, reviewing patient demographics for the oncology trial. The rhythmic drumming of the storm usually brought a sense of quiet isolation to the house. That isolation was shattered just before dinner when a sleek silver sports car skidded onto the wet gravel of the driveway. I recognized the vehicle immediately. Victoria never drove down from Washington unless a holiday or a major family crisis required her physical presence. The heavy oak front door swung open. My sister stepped into the foyer, shaking the rain from her expensive cashmere coat. Victoria built her entire persona around projecting untouchable corporate success. She normally wore immaculate tailored suits and carried herself with the sharp, rigid posture of a woman who commanded expensive hourly billing rates. Today, however, her appearance was strategically chaotic. Her hair was damp and unstyled. Her eyes were wide and framed by faint dark circles that looked suspiciously like smudged makeup. She carried a thick leather briefcase clutched tightly against her chest. Barbara materialized from the kitchen, holding a mug of steeped dandelion root tea. My mother rushed forward the moment she saw Victoria's calculated distress. "My darling, what is wrong?" Barbara asked, setting her mug on the credenza and wrapping her arms around her eldest daughter. Victoria let out a shaky, theatrical breath. "Everything is falling apart, Mom. The new tech venture is drowning." I remained seated at my desk watching the performance unfold. 2 years ago, Victoria leveraged her corporate law connections to launch a boutique tech startup in Seattle. She built an automated legal consulting platform for high-net-worth clients. It was the reason she set up the dummy corporation at our grandmother's address to shield her initial venture capital from state taxes. The startup was supposed to make her a tech millionaire before she turned 35. "I need to see Grandma Victoria," whispered, her voice trembling with manufactured panic. "We have to talk to her right now. It is an emergency." Barbara nodded solemnly as if Victoria had just announced a spiritual awakening. She took Victoria's arm and guided her down the long hallway toward the master suite. I stood up and followed them. I did not ask for permission to join the meeting. My digital ledger was open on my laptop, and I knew another major entry was about to occur. The master bedroom was dim. The amber glow of the bedside lamp cast long shadows across the hand-stitched quilt. Helen lay in the center of the mattress, looking incredibly small. The oxygen concentrator hummed its steady mechanical rhythm. Victoria approached the edge of the bed and dropped to her knees. She placed her hands over Helen's frail fingers. "Grandma, wake up," Victoria murmured, letting a single, calculated tear slip down her cheek. "I need your help." Helen's eyelids fluttered open. She looked at Victoria with a soft, blank expression. "What is it, dear?" Helen asked. Her voice was thin and raspy. "Is it time for breakfast?" "It is evening, Mom," Barbara interjected, gently stroking Helen's forehead. "Victoria is in trouble. Her beautiful company is facing a cash flow issue. The investors are being very aggressive, and it is disrupting her life path. We need to save the family legacy." Victoria lifted her heavy leather briefcase onto the mattress. She snapped the brass latches open and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. The papers were bound by a blue cover page. Even from the doorway, I recognized the format of banking paperwork. "It is just a temporary bridge loan," Grandma Victoria said, wiping her eyes. "I have a home equity line of credit application right here. We just need to borrow against the equity in this house. It is perfectly safe. My startup will secure Series B funding by next quarter, and I will pay the balance off immediately. If I do not get this injection of capital by Monday morning, I lose everything." My pulse slowed to a cold, steady beat. The historical estate was fully paid off. It was worth millions of dollars in the current Portland housing market. Victoria was not asking for a small personal favor. She was asking our 82-year-old grandmother to leverage her only remaining asset to fund a failing tech startup. If Victoria defaulted on the equity line, the bank would foreclose on the property. Helen would lose her home and the medical care required to keep her alive. Barbara pulled a gold fountain pen from her tunic pocket and pressed it into Helen's right hand. "It is just a signature, Mom," Barbara coaxed. "It secures Victoria's future. It is what families do for each other." Helen looked down at the thick stack of financial documents. She held the gold pen loosely between her fingers. Then she began the most brilliant piece of silent theater I have ever witnessed. Her hand began to shake. The tremor started in her wrist and traveled down to her knuckles. She lowered the pen toward the signature line, but her hand jerked sideways. The gold pen slipped from her grasp and tumbled onto the quilt. "Oh, my clumsy hands," Helen whispered, her eyes wide with feigned confusion. "What am I signing again, Barbara? Is this the check for the grocer? The grocer said apples are too expensive this week." "It is not for the grocer, Mom," Barbara said. Her serene tone strained under a sudden flash of impatience. She picked up the pen and forced it back into Helen's hand. "It is for Victoria. Just write your name." Helen tried again. This time, she knocked the entire stack of documents off the mattress. The heavy papers scattered across the hardwood floor. "I cannot see the lines," Helen murmured, sinking back into her pillows and closing her eyes. "I am so tired, Barbara. I need to rest my eyes for a moment." Victoria's mask of vulnerability vanished. Her jaw tightened into a hard, sharp angle. She scrambled onto the floor and gathered the scattered documents. She tapped them against the nightstand to align the edges. Then she turned her gaze toward me. "She needs a witness anyway," Victoria snapped, shoving the blue-bound stack toward my chest. "The bank requires a secondary signature affirming she is of sound mind and acting under her own free will. You are the clinical coordinator, Alethea. Your signature carries weight. Sign the witness line and date it." I looked at the documents. I looked at the gold pen Victoria held out to me. Then I looked at my mother, who was watching me with expectant, demanding eyes. "I will not sign that," I said. My voice was quiet and perfectly steady in the dim room. Victoria's hand remained suspended in the air. "What did you just say?" "I said no," I replied, stepping back from the bed. "I am a licensed clinical researcher. My professional ethics require me to protect vulnerable subjects. Grandma cannot even hold a pen, and she thinks you are the grocery clerk. If I sign a legal document claiming she understands the financial risk of a home equity loan, I would be committing fraud." Barbara stood up quickly. Her linen tunic rustled in the quiet room. "How dare you bring your sterile clinical rules into this sanctuary, Alethea? This is not a hospital. This is a family. Your sister is drowning, and you are standing there quoting procedure? You are disrupting the spiritual harmony of this entire home. I am protecting the patient, I said, maintaining eye contact with my mother. You want to mortgage the roof over her head to save a failing software company. That is not spiritual harmony, Mom. That is financial exploitation. The words landed like a physical blow. Barbara gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. You are a cold, rigid girl, Barbara hissed. You have lived in Portland your entire life, and you have learned absolutely nothing about community or compassion. You have no empathy. If empathy means letting you bankrupt a dying woman, then you are right, I answered. I folded my arms across my chest. I have none. Victoria slammed the documents back into her leather briefcase. She snapped the latches shut with a sharp, metallic crack. You are going to regret this, Alethea, Victoria said. Her voice was low and vibrating with genuine fury. When I lose my company because of your stubborn, self-righteous ethics, I am going to hold you personally responsible. I did not flinch. You can hold me responsible all you want, Victoria, but you are not holding the deed to this house. Victoria shoved past me in the doorway. Her shoulder hit my arm hard enough to leave a bruise, but I did not step aside. I listened to her heavy footsteps march down the hallway. The front door opened and slammed shut with enough force to rattle the antique windows. A moment later, her sports car roared to life and tore out of the driveway, throwing wet gravel into the grass. Barbara refused to look at me. She gathered her mug of dandelion tea from the credenza and walked out of the room without a single word. The silence she left behind was thick and suffocating. I stood alone in the dim master suite. The oxygen concentrator continued its steady hum. I walked over to the bed and gently pulled the quilt up around Helen's shoulders. She opened one eye. The grocery clerk, I whispered, leaning down. Helen gave me a tiny, razor-sharp smile. She closed her eye again and settled into the pillows. I walked back to my laptop in the living room. I logged the attempted home equity loan into my encrypted spreadsheet. I noted the date, the time, and the specific financial threat. Victoria left empty-handed today, but desperate people do not surrender. They simply escalate their tactics. And judging by the rage in my sister's eyes, she was going to return with something much worse than a loan application. The weekend passed in a tense, suffocating silence. The heavy rain continued to wash over the Portland estate, leaving the historic grounds soaked and quiet. Barbara avoided my gaze, spending her days meditating in the sunroom and burning imported sage to clear what she called the toxic hostility of the house. She did not offer to help with the oxygen tanks. She did not ask about Helen's vitals. Victoria remained in Seattle, ignoring my text messages regarding the grocery delivery. I used the isolation to update my encrypted digital ledger. Every missed shift, every ignored request, and every passive-aggressive comment went straight into the spreadsheet. Monday morning arrived with a sharp ping from my laptop. I was sitting at the kitchen island, reviewing patient consent forms for my clinical trial, when a calendar invite appeared on my screen. The sender was Victoria Legal Consulting, LLC. The subject line read, Mandatory Family Alignment Meeting. The attached link was for a secure video conference scheduled to begin in 10 minutes. My clinical training kicked in. A sudden, formal meeting meant a change in protocol. I closed my trial data, opened a blank document to take notes, and clicked the video link. The screen split into 3 squares. My own face stared back at me in the bottom corner, pale and exhausted under the harsh kitchen lighting. The top left square displayed Victoria. She was back in her natural habitat. She sat in her sleek Seattle penthouse wearing a tailored navy blazer, her hair pulled back into a severe professional knot. She sipped a shot of espresso from a ceramic cup. The panic and manufactured tears from Friday were gone. She looked calculated and dangerous. The top right square flickered to life. Barbara appeared, sitting in the estate's sunroom just down the hall from me. She wore a woven hemp sweater and held a steaming mug of herbal tea. Even through the digital distortion, her serene, condescending smile made my jaw tighten. Alethea, Barbara began, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. Thank you for joining us. We wanted to have a restorative conversation about Grandma's journey. I kept my hands resting flat on the marble counter. What about her journey, Mom? Victoria set her espresso cup down. She leaned toward her webcam, taking control of the narrative with the practiced ease of a corporate litigator. "We are stepping in, Alethea. Friday night made it painfully clear that the situation here has degraded beyond your ability to manage. You are too close to the situation. Your emotional attachment is clouding your judgment and putting Helen at risk." My heart executed a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. "I am managing her care perfectly," I replied, keeping my tone flat. "Her oxygen saturation is stable, her nutrition is tracked. You are the ones trying to mortgage her roof." "That is exactly the kind of hostility we are talking about," Barbara sighed, placing a hand over her heart. "You are carrying so much dark energy, darling. It is preventing you from seeing the truth. Your grandmother is fading." She did not even recognize Victoria on Friday. She thought a legally binding financial document was a grocery list. Her mind is slipping away, and it is our spiritual duty to protect her from her own decline. The trap sprang shut. I realized instantly why Victoria had pushed the home equity loan so hard, and why she had demanded I act as a witness to Helen's feigned confusion. The loan was never the actual goal. It was a stress test. They needed a documented incident of cognitive failure to justify their next move. "We are petitioning the state of Oregon this week," Victoria stated. Her voice was pure ice. "We are filing for a full medical and financial conservatorship. The court will declare Helen legally incompetent due to advanced dementia. As her eldest granddaughter and a practicing attorney, I will be granted full power of attorney to manage her estate." The air in the kitchen grew thin. A conservatorship was not a mere shift in responsibilities. It was a total legal erasure of a human being. If the state granted their petition, Helen would lose the right to make her own medical decisions. She would lose control of her bank accounts. She would lose the legal right to decide where she lived. Victoria would own her life on paper. "What exactly does managing her estate entail?" I asked. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to type every single word they said. Barbara smiled, a tragic, martyred smile. "We have to think about her long-term transition, Alethea. This house is too large. The stairs are a hazard. The energy is stagnant. Victoria has found a wonderful managed care community on the outskirts of the city. It is very practical. Once we transition her there, Victoria can liquidate this property. The proceeds will ensure Grandma has a roof over her head, and the remainder will be properly invested to secure the family legacy." They were going to sell the historic estate to fund Victoria's failing software company. My clinical experience managing oncology wards meant I knew exactly what kind of facility Victoria considered practical. It would not be a luxury private suite. It would be a state-funded, linoleum nightmare smelling of industrial bleach and boiled vegetables. It would be understaffed by overworked aides who did not have the time to check oxygen tubing or apply barrier creams. Helen was 82 years old and accustomed to the quiet dignity of her own home. If they forced her into a cheap institutional bed, the shock and neglect would kill her in less than a month. They were not plotting a financial transition. They were plotting a death sentence. "You cannot do this," I said. The quiet fury in my voice finally bled through the professional restraint. "You have no medical proof of her decline. You have a single staged interaction where she dropped a pen." "We do not need much," Alethea, Victoria countered, adjusting her blazer. Oregon courts lean heavily toward protecting elders from themselves. Barbara is her daughter, and I am an officer of the court. We will attest to her erratic behavior. We will mention your refusal to cooperate with standard financial planning. The judge will grant a temporary emergency conservatorship within days. You need to pack your things and prepare to vacate the premises by the end of the month." My phone vibrated on the counter next to my laptop, the screen illuminated with a text message from my cousin Jasmine. Jasmine knew about the mandatory family meeting. I had texted her the calendar invite the moment I received it. As a corporate auditor, she understood the mechanics of hostile takeovers better than anyone. I glanced down at the glowing screen while Victoria continued to lecture me about the legal process of property liquidation. The text message from Jasmine was brief and cited specific civil codes. "Check Oregon Revised Statutes, Chapter 125, the message read. A judge will not grant a permanent conservatorship based solely on family testimony if it is contested. They require an independent physician's evaluation to prove actual cognitive incapacity. Do not argue with them on the video call. Let them think they have cornered you. Your digital ledger is your legal shield. We need a doctor. I read the text twice. A sudden, sharp clarity washed over my panic. Jasmine was right. Victoria was using aggressive legal jargon to intimidate me into surrendering, assuming my medical background did not cover probate law. They thought I was just a tired, burnt-out nurse who would fold under the threat of a courtroom battle. They did not realize my encrypted clinical notes were no longer just a venting mechanism for my domestic frustration. The Helen Estate Audit Protocol was a comprehensive, time-stamped evidentiary record of their neglect and financial exploitation. More importantly, it documented my unbroken daily presence as the sole competent caregiver. I looked back at the screen. Barbara was sipping her tea, looking incredibly pleased with the spiritual harmony of her hostile takeover. Victoria was waiting for my breakdown. She wanted me to shout. She wanted me to throw a tantrum so she could record the meeting and submit it to the judge as proof of my emotional instability. I reached out and adjusted the angle of my webcam. I smoothed my expression into a blank, unreadable mask. I understand your position, Victoria, I said, keeping my tone deferential and quiet. If you feel a medical conservatorship is the only path forward, then I suppose we will let the state of Oregon review the evidence. Victoria's brow furrowed. The lack of resistance confused her. She expected a war. She did not expect a clinical concession. Good, Victoria snapped, recovering her authoritative posture. I am glad you are finally seeing reason. I will have my paralegal draft the initial eviction notices for the carriage house and the main property. Expect to be served by Friday. Barbara smiled, raising her mug to the camera. We love you, Alethea. This is healing for all of us. I reached for the mouse. I will see you in court, Mom, I said. I clicked the red button and ended the video call. The screen went dark, leaving me staring at my own reflection in the glossy monitor. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the raw adrenaline of a shifting battlefield. The conflict was no longer a private domestic dispute over oxygen tubing and stolen watches. We had entered the arena of life or death legal warfare. I picked up my phone and opened my contacts. I scrolled past my family members and located a specific number from my hospital network. Dr. Aris Thorne was the top independent geriatric psychiatrist in the Pacific Northwest. He consulted on my most complex oncology trials regarding patient competency. He was brilliant, ruthless in his assessments, and impervious to family drama. Victoria and Barbara wanted to play a legal game using Helen's cognitive capacity as the prize. They were about to discover what happens when you challenge a clinical trial manager to a battle of medical documentation. I hit the call button and raised the phone to my ear, already drafting the counterstrike in my mind. Barbara packed her woven hemp duffel bag on Wednesday morning. She announced her departure for a 4-day, silent, holistic retreat in the Cascade Mountains. The restorative journey cost $3,000. She charged the entire amount to the joint checking account designated for Helen's emergency medical expenses. I did not blink. I stood in the foyer and watched her adjust her oversized linen scarf. I simply logged the fraudulent transaction into my encrypted spreadsheet on my phone while helping her carry an organic yoga mat to her hybrid vehicle. As soon as her car disappeared down the long gravel driveway, the atmosphere inside the historic estate shifted. The heavy, suffocating tension evaporated into the crisp Portland air. I locked the solid mahogany front door and pulled out my phone. The defensive phase of my caregiving protocol was over. It was time to go on the offensive. I contacted Dr. Aris Thorne. As a leading independent geriatric psychiatrist in the Pacific Northwest, he commanded a premium consulting fee. He usually booked months in advance. But my hospital connections and my role as a senior clinical trial manager gave me direct access to his private line. I explained the impending conservatorship threat and the specific legal parameters Victoria planned to use. He understood the urgency of a hostile probate maneuver. He agreed to conduct a private house call that same afternoon. Dr. Thorne arrived at noon. He walked into the foyer carrying a weathered leather medical bag. He brought his clinical assistant, Clara, who also carried a state-issued notary seal. Dr. Thorne did not wear a white coat. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that stood in stark contrast to the faux spiritual decor my mother had scattered throughout the house. I led them down the hallway toward the master's suite. I opened the bedroom door, anticipating the familiar sight of my grandmother resting weakly against her pillows. Instead, Helen was sitting upright. The hand-stitched quilt was folded neatly across her lap. She reached up and pulled the plastic oxygen cannula from her nose, placing it on the nightstand. "I only wear that synthetic tubing when Barbara is in the room," Helen said. Her voice was thin but steady and laced with a dry, biting wit. "It makes your mother feel important to hover over a dying woman. I am old, Alethea, but my lungs work just fine without a machine." I stopped at the foot of the bed. I felt a slow, creeping realization wash over me. Helen had been acting. She had been playing the role of the frail, fading matriarch to pacify my mother's obsessive need for control. Dr. Thorne stepped forward and introduced himself. He pulled a chair up to the bedside and opened his leather bag. "We are here to conduct a comprehensive cognitive and executive function evaluation, Helen," he explained gently. "Your family intends to petition the state to declare you legally incapacitated. We need to establish a medical baseline." "Let us begin," Helen replied, resting her hands on her lap. The evaluation started with standard neurological protocols. Dr. Thorne administered the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. He asked Helen to recall a sequence of 5 random words: face, velvet, church, daisy, red. He asked her to draw a clock face reading 10 minutes past 11. He instructed her to count backward from 100 by intervals of 7. Helen did not hesitate. She recited the numbers in a rapid, flawless cadence. She drew the clock with sharp, steady lines. She navigated the spatial awareness questions with the precision of a woman half her age. She aced every single metric on the clinical exam, proving her mind was flawlessly intact. Dr. Thorne nodded, making notes on his encrypted tablet. "Your short-term recall and spatial reasoning are pristine, Helen. Now we need to discuss financial capacity. A judge will want to know if you understand the scope of your assets and how they are managed. Can you tell me who currently handles your banking?" Helen offered a small, razor-sharp smile. She looked past the doctor and locked eyes with me. "Barbara believes she is managing my wealth," Helen stated. "She believes she is very clever because she set up online banking to bypass the paper statements. But your mother has always been careless. She prints the wire transfer confirmations for her own records and throws them in the kitchen recycling bin. I read them every Tuesday afternoon when the house is empty." I stood frozen near the doorway. The room fell entirely silent. "My daughter has stolen $42,000 over the last 3 years," Helen continued, her voice dropping to a cold procedural register. "She spent $3,200 on a sound bath therapy session in Sedona. She spent $400 a month on imported organic eucalyptus oils. Last week, she wired $18,400 to a European furniture designer in Seattle to furnish Victoria's luxury penthouse. The routing number she used ends in 4782. Dr. Thorne stopped typing. He looked up from his tablet. Clara, the clinical assistant, stood perfectly still, holding her notary stamp. "They assume I am trapped in a fog because my physical body is failing," Helen said, leaning back against her pillows. "I let them play their little holistic games because I needed the physical care to stay in my own home. And I knew Alethea would never let them truly hurt me. But they are getting greedy. Victoria wants the deed to this house, and she is willing to put me in a state facility to get it." I stepped closer to the bed. "You knew they were draining the accounts?" I asked. Helen reached out and took my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "I knew everything, Alethea. I watched you buy my medical supplies with your own debit card. I watched you log their absences on your computer. I saw the reflection of your spreadsheet in your glasses when you sat at the kitchen island. You stopped acting like a victim and started acting like a trial manager. You built the evidence. Now we are going to use it." Dr. Thorne cleared his throat. He set his tablet aside and pulled a thick stack of legal paper from his leather bag. He uncapped a fountain pen. "I have evaluated thousands of geriatric patients throughout my career," Dr. Thorne said, looking directly at Helen. "You possess the highest level of executive function I have witnessed in a decade. You are of pristine, sound mind. You understand your financial liabilities, and you clearly recognize the fraudulent actions taken against you." He drafted the medical evaluation summary on the spot. He wrote a binding legal affidavit stating unequivocally that Helen was mentally competent, free from cognitive decline, and fully capable of directing her own medical and financial affairs. He signed the bottom line with a swift, heavy stroke. Clara stepped forward and applied the official state notary seal. The heavy metallic thud of the stamp echoed in the quiet bedroom. The dynamic of the household shifted permanently in that single moment. The defensive panic that had choked me for 5 years vanished. We were no longer two isolated women hiding from a toxic family. We were an active, unified front, armed with undisputed medical evidence. Dr. Thorne handed me the notarized affidavit. "Keep this secure," he advised, packing his leather bag. "If your sister files a conservatorship petition, this single piece of paper will destroy her case before a judge even hears opening arguments." I thanked him and escorted him to the front door. When I returned to the master's suite, Helen was sitting up, looking out the window at the rain-soaked gardens. The mask of confusion was gone. The sharp, calculating matriarch of the family had returned. I folded the heavy paper and placed it inside a waterproof envelope. I left the estate an hour later and drove straight to the financial district in downtown Portland. I walked into the subterranean vault of my private bank and rented a steel safety deposit box. I placed the notarized affidavit inside the cold metal drawer and turned the brass key. I locked my mother's and sister's destruction inside a vault they did not even know existed. When I returned to the estate, the rain had finally stopped. I walked into the bedroom to check on Helen. She was waiting for me. "We have the medical shield," Helen said quietly. "Now we need the sword. Tomorrow morning you are driving me downtown again, Alethea. We are going to find the most ruthless estate attorney in this city, and we are going to rewrite history before your mother gets home from her silent retreat." Thursday morning arrived with cold, crisp sunlight piercing through the heavy clouds. Barbara was on day 2 of her silent, holistic mountain retreat. Victoria was in Seattle running her dummy corporation and hiding from her failing startup investors. The historic Portland estate was empty and profoundly quiet. I walked into the master suite and helped Helen dress in a tailored wool blazer she had not worn in nearly 3 years. She looked physically frail, but her eyes were bright with a calculated, sharp purpose. We bypassed the oxygen concentrator entirely. I guided her out the front door, settled her into the passenger seat of my car, and we drove out of the tree-lined neighborhood toward the towering glass and steel skyline of the downtown financial district. Our destination was a high-rise building overlooking the Willamette River. The progressive, eco-conscious culture of the city faded the moment we stepped out of the elevator onto the top floor. The reception area of the law firm was paneled in dark walnut and smoked glass. This was not a holistic sanctuary for spiritual healing. This was a fortress built for elite wealth preservation. We were there to see Silas Montgomery, a senior estate planning litigator renowned for dismantling hostile probate challenges. Silas met us in a sprawling corner conference room that offered a panoramic view of the bridges crossing the river. He wore a severe pinstripe suit and possessed the cold, calculating demeanor of a man who measured family loyalty in tax brackets and billable hours. Helen sat at the polished granite table and slid Dr. Thorne's notarized affidavit across the smooth surface. Silas read the psychiatric evaluation in silence. His eyes tracked the clinical language, confirming Helen's pristine mental acuity. When he finished reading, he folded his hands over the document and offered a faint, approving nod. "Your daughter and granddaughter are preparing a conservatorship petition. Silas stated correctly, deducing the context of the medical paperwork. They intend to declare you legally incapacitated to force a liquidation of your real estate assets. Victoria is a corporate attorney, Helen replied, her voice steady and clear in the echoing room. She knows the probate courts in Oregon are heavily backlogged. She assumes if I die with a standard will, she can tie the estate up in litigation for years until Alethea runs out of money to fight her. I want to bypass probate entirely. I want the transfer of my assets to be immediate, ironclad, and untouchable. Silas leaned back in his heavy leather chair. He looked at me, then back to Helen. A standard last will and testament is a public document. It invites contests from disgruntled heirs and provides a battleground for toxic families. If we want to sever Victoria's legal standing, we need to utilize a different architecture. He outlined the strategy with surgical precision. Helen would execute an irrevocable living trust. By placing the historic Portland estate and all remaining liquid assets inside the trust, the property technically ceased to belong to Helen as an individual. It belonged to the legal entity shielding it from any standard probate interference. Furthermore, Silas continued sliding a blank legal pad toward himself. We will file a transfer on death deed for the primary residence. The moment your passing is certified, the deed automatically transfers full ownership to Alethea. Victoria will not even have the opportunity to contest the home in probate court because the house will never enter the probate system. It skips the judicial process entirely. Helen turned to me. Show him the ledger, Alethea. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the encrypted digital spreadsheet where I had tracked 5 years of unpaid labor, out-of-pocket medical expenses, and round-the-clock clinical monitoring. I turned the screen toward Silas. The litigator adjusted his silver-rimmed glasses and scrolled through the thousands of logged hours. He scrutinized the meticulous documentation of sponge baths, physical transfers, medication administration, and vital sign tracking. Silas looked up from the screen. A genuine spark of predatory respect flashed in his dark eyes. You are a senior clinical research coordinator. Yes, I answered. You have treated this caregiving arrangement as a documented medical contract, Silas murmured, doing rapid mental math. He picked up his gold pen and began writing figures on his legal pad. The average cost for elite 24-hour in-home nursing care in this region is approximately $200 an hour. Over 5 years, that total exceeds $800,000. When you factor in your out-of-pocket medical supplies and the opportunity cost of your suspended clinical career, the sum eclipses the current market value of the estate. He pushed the legal pad toward Helen. We are not going to structure this property transfer as an inheritance or a familial gift. Gifts can be challenged in court under the guise of undue influence. We are going to structure the irrevocable living trust as a formalized payment for a debt. I felt a cold rush of adrenaline. Silas was recategorizing my 5 years of silent suffering into an impenetrable fortress of contract law. The transfer of the estate will be legally coded as retroactive compensation for services rendered, Silas explained, his voice sharp and definitive. Helen is settling a monumental outstanding invoice for half a decade of elite clinical care. Victoria cannot challenge a legal debt repayment. If she attempts to sue the estate for her inheritance, she will find an empty vault, and she will be legally obligated to cover Alethea's unpaid nursing invoices first. She would literally owe you hundreds of thousands of dollars. Helen smiled. It was a cold, brilliant expression. Draft it, she commanded. The paralegals moved swiftly. Within 2 hours, the towering stack of legal architecture was printed and bound. Helen signed the irrevocable living trust. She signed the transfer on death deed. Clara, the clinical notary, had authenticated her mental state just yesterday, giving these new signatures impenetrable legal armor. I sat in the leather chair watching the ink dry on the thick parchment paper. The trap was officially set and armed. Victoria's defeat was already sealed in a subterranean vault and bound by state law. My mother and sister were plotting to steal an empire that no longer existed. Silas gathered the signed documents and placed them into a secure, fireproof folder. He handed the packet to Helen, but his gaze fixed on me. The warning in his eyes extinguished any premature sense of victory. The legal mechanics are flawless, Silas cautioned, but the practical application requires total discipline. If your mother or sister discover this trust exists before Helen passes, their strategy will shift from legal theft to raw psychological retaliation. Victoria will realize her only remaining option is to challenge the trust while Helen is still alive. They will escalate the conservatorship battle, drag Helen into endless depositions, and subject her to immense emotional stress, just to break her spirit. The reality of his warning settled over me like a heavy lead blanket. The paperwork protected the property, but it did not protect my grandmother from the immediate physical and emotional toll of a bitter family war. To protect Helen's remaining peace, the charade had to continue. I had to drive back to the historic estate. I had to put the synthetic oxygen tubing back on Helen's face. I had to go back to being the exhausted, silent, abused workhorse of the family. I had to endure my mother's faux spiritual lectures and my sister's corporate bullying, knowing I held the winning hand and never letting a single trace of that victory show on my face. We left the law firm and descended into the bustling Portland streets. The ride back to the estate was quiet. I guided Helen back into her bed, tucked the quilt around her shoulders, and hooked the oxygen concentrator back up. The rhythmic pulse of the machine filled the room once again. The legal shield was built, but the financial audit was only half finished. Victoria had funneled $18,000 for furniture, and Barbara had skimmed $42,000 for retreats. But those numbers were merely the surface transactions. I pulled my phone from my pocket and sent a secure text message to my cousin, Jasmine. I needed her corporate accounting skills to dig deeper into the joint checking account. If we were going to let my family walk into a trap, I needed to know exactly how much stolen money they were carrying when the floor finally dropped out from under them. Jasmine arrived at the estate on Friday evening. The heavy Portland rain had returned, drumming a steady rhythm against the leaded glass windows. My mother was still isolating herself in the Cascade Mountains on her expensive silent retreat. I unlocked the heavy oak door and let my cousin inside. Jasmine did not bring a raincoat. She carried a heavy silver briefcase containing the proprietary auditing hardware she used for her downtown corporate firm. We bypassed the living room and set up our workspace on the expansive dining table. The mahogany surface was usually reserved for my mother's performative holiday dinners. Tonight, it became a forensic laboratory. I poured 2 glasses of cold water and set them on coasters. I provided Jasmine with the encrypted digital ledger and the login credentials for Helen's primary retirement accounts. My grandmother had granted me digital access months ago, but I had only used it to monitor the baseline utility drafts. I never possessed the accounting expertise to trace complex internal transfers. Jasmine possessed that exact expertise. Jasmine opened her laptop. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with rapid, practiced precision. The screen filled with cascading rows of financial data. For the first hour, neither of us spoke. The only sound in the room was the clicking of keys and the distant hum of the oxygen concentrator down the hallway. I watched the columns of numbers populate on the bright monitor. My clinical training taught me how to read medical charts and patient demographics. Jasmine knew how to read the hidden architecture of human greed. She ran a cross-reference algorithm, matching the outgoing wire transfers from Helen's retirement fund against the public business registries in Oregon and Washington. "We have a structural anomaly," Jasmine said softly. Her dark eyes remained locked on the glowing screen. "Look at this recurring vendor payment, Alethea." I walked around the table and stood behind her chair. She pointed to a series of monthly drafts labeled as Holistic Wellness and Spiritual Therapeutic Alignment. The payments ranged from $3,000 to $5,000 each. They were billed by a company called Radiant Energy Solutions. "Helen never received any spiritual therapy," I stated. My voice felt tight in my throat. "I administer every single aspect of her physical care. The only holistic items in this house are the organic essential oils Barbara buys for herself." Jasmine nodded. She opened a new browser tab and accessed a commercial database. "Radiant Energy Solutions is not a wellness clinic," Jasmine explained. It is a shell corporation. It was registered 12 months ago in the state of Washington. I am pulling the articles of incorporation right now. The document loaded on the screen. The listed managing director of the shell company was Barbara. My mother was billing her own mother's retirement account for phantom medical services. She generated fake invoices for acupuncture, bogus organic supplements, and non-existent energy alignments. She used her position as the designated family spiritual guide to mask raw financial theft under the guise of alternative medicine. But the money trail did not stop in Barbara's bank account. Jasmine traced the routing numbers attached to the shell company. She followed the cash flow through a labyrinth of intermediate transfers. Every single dollar Barbara extracted from the retirement fund was deposited directly into the primary operating account of Victoria Legal Consulting, LLC. The breath left my lungs. The entire ecosystem of our family dynamic clarified into a single, horrifying picture. The toxic favoritism was not just an emotional blind spot. It was a calculated money laundering operation. Barbara was systematically draining the historic estate's liquid assets to prop up Victoria's failing tech startup in Seattle. They engineered a pipeline of stolen cash, and they used my unpaid, grueling labor as the physical cover story. While I bathed Helen and tracked her vital signs, they liquidated her future to fund their own corporate ambitions. The emotional betrayal settled deep in my bones. I felt a cold, heavy realization that my mother and sister never viewed me as a family member. They viewed me as free manual labor, designed to keep their victim alive long enough to drain the accounts dry. Jasmine leaned back in her chair. She rubbed her temples. The theft exceeds $120,000 over the last 12 months, she murmured. They are accelerating the withdrawals. That is why Victoria pushed so hard for the home equity loan last week. The retirement fund is running low. They need to tap the physical equity of the property before the tech startup collapses. Jasmine hit a few more keys. She isolated the miscellaneous personal expenses Barbara had hidden within the shell company ledger. I need you to look at one specific transaction, Alethea, Jasmine said. Her tone was devoid of its usual corporate detachment. It was laced with quiet, fierce anger. She pulled up a digital receipt and expanded the image on the screen. It was a charge for an international luxury airline. The invoice detailed 2 first-class tickets to Cabo San Lucas. The total cost was $8,000. The purchase date was stamped clearly at the top of the invoice. It was the second week of November from the previous year. I stared at the date. The numbers burned themselves into my retinas. Last November, Helen contracted a severe respiratory infection. Her lungs filled with fluid. The hospital recommended a skilled nursing facility, but Barbara refused, claiming the institutional environment would crush Helen's spirit. I was forced to take unpaid leave under the Family and Medical Leave Act. I spent 3 weeks sleeping on the floor next to Helen's bed. I administered breathing treatments every 4 hours. I cleaned soiled linens in the middle of the night. I lost 15 pounds because I barely had time to eat. During that exact same period, Barbara told me she was traveling to a secluded ashram in the desert to meditate and pray for Helen's recovery. She claimed she needed to channel divine healing energy from a distance. She was not praying in the desert. She was drinking champagne in a first-class cabin on her way to a luxury resort in Mexico. And she paid for the vacation using the very money that should have hired a night nurse to help me keep my grandmother alive. I reached out and touched the edge of the mahogany table. The wood felt freezing cold. For 5 years, a tiny, persistent voice in the back of my mind had whispered that I was being too harsh. That voice told me Barbara and Victoria were just flawed individuals, struggling with the emotional weight of a dying elder. That voice begged me to preserve the fragile harmony of our family unit. That voice died in my head the moment I looked at the airline receipt. Any lingering daughterly guilt evaporated into the quiet room. The invisible chains of progressive Portland empathy, the weaponized guilt, the relentless demands for spiritual grace, they all snapped and fell away. I was no longer a conflicted relative trying to salvage a broken relationship. I was a clinical trial manager observing a malignant tumor that needed to be surgically excised. Jasmine watched my face. She closed the laptop screen. "The audit is complete," she said. "I have downloaded the entire ledger onto an encrypted flash drive. We have the wire transfers, the fake invoices, and the shell company registrations. It is a bulletproof forensic timeline of elder financial exploitation. What is our next procedural step?" I turned away from the table and looked out the window. The rain continued to fall over the historic gardens. The trap was fully set. We had Dr. Thorne's notarized medical affidavit confirming Helen's pristine cognitive capacity. We had the irrevocable living trust securing the estate. Now we had the audited financial ledger proving grand theft. All we needed was the proper venue to execute the final phase of the protocol. My mother and sister operated on the currency of public perception. They craved an audience to validate their fake devotion. Victoria had already hinted at her plan to secure the conservatorship signatures in front of witnesses to legitimize her hostile takeover. She would want a crowd. She would want a stage. "Thanksgiving is next Thursday," I said. My voice echoed in the dining room, steady and entirely devoid of emotion. Barbara invited the entire extended family. She invited her holistic friends and Victoria's corporate colleagues from Seattle. They want to use the holiday dinner to pressure Grandma into signing the power of attorney paperwork in front of 30 people. They think the social pressure will force us to comply. Jasmine picked up the silver briefcase. A faint, predatory smile touched the corners of her mouth. They are building a theater for their own destruction. I nodded. The narrative pace of our quiet resistance had reached its terminal velocity. I walked Jasmine to the front door and watched her drive away into the dark, rain-slicked streets. I locked the deadbolt and turned back toward the silent house. My family thought they had volunteered me for an endless, unpaid shift. They did not realize they had just hired their own executioner. Thanksgiving morning arrived cloaked in a thick gray mist that rolled off the Willamette River and settled over the historic gardens. Inside the estate, the air was heavy with the scent of roasted root vegetables, organic sage stuffing, and simmering cranberries. Barbara had spent the past 3 days orchestrating an elaborate aesthetic performance. She invited 30 guests to fill the sprawling dining room and adjacent parlor. The guest list was a strategic curation of her holistic wellness circle, extended distant relatives who rarely visited, and several of Victoria's high-powered corporate colleagues who had flown down from Seattle for the holiday. The sheer volume of people was designed to create an inescapable arena of social compliance. My mother and sister understood that public perception was a powerful weapon. They intended to use the crushing weight of polite society to force my submission. I spent the early afternoon in the master suite helping Helen prepare for the ordeal. We selected a soft cashmere cardigan that hung loosely over her frame, enhancing the visual illusion of frailty they expected to see. I checked her vital signs out of habit, but my focus was entirely on the tactical execution of the evening. Helen sat on the edge of the mattress and patted my hand. Her eyes were bright and steady. "Let them serve the main course." Alethea Helen murmured, "Let them pour the wine and gather their audience. A trap only works if the hunter believes the prey is oblivious." I nodded and guided her out of the bedroom. We walked slowly down the long hallway toward the dining room. The moment we appeared, the ambient chatter of 30 guests dropped to a hushed, reverent murmur. Barbara rushed forward wearing a flowing silk tunic. She placed a theatrical hand over her heart and guided Helen to the head of the mahogany table. The dinner unfolded exactly as a staged production would. Crystal glasses clinked. Silverware scraped against fine china. Victoria sat at the opposite end of the table, holding court with her software investors, projecting the image of a benevolent, successful daughter returning home to manage a tragic family crisis. Throughout the meal, Barbara drifted between conversations, quietly seeding the narrative of my grandmother's rapid cognitive decline. I listened as my mother whispered to a distant cousin about Helen's fading memory and the heavy spiritual burden of managing her transition. I sat near the kitchen door eating in silence. I did not correct the lies. I let the false narrative weave its way through the room, knowing the higher they built their pedestal of fake empathy, the harder the eventual fall would shatter their reputations. The turning point arrived just as the plates were cleared for dessert. The heavy brass knocker on the front door sounded. Barbara dabbed her mouth with a linen napkin and walked to the foyer. When she returned, she was accompanied by a woman wearing a stiff gray blazer and carrying a black leather portfolio. The stranger possessed the nervous, rigid posture of a professional who was paid per signature. It was a mobile notary public. Victoria stood up from her chair and tapped a silver spoon against her water glass. The sharp ringing sound commanded the attention of the entire room. The overlapping conversation ceased. 30 faces turned toward the head of the table. "Thank you all for being here today," Victoria began. Her voice was modulated to a perfect pitch of sorrowful responsibility. "Thanksgiving is a time for gratitude, but it is also a time for difficult family transitions. As many of you know, my grandmother has been struggling. Her mind is slipping away from us. It breaks my heart to watch her fade." A collective sigh of sympathy rippled through the holistic wellness friends. Several guests offered Barbara sad, knowing glances. "We cannot let her navigate this decline without a safety net." Victoria continued stepping away from her chair and walking toward Helen. To ensure she receives the proper care and to protect her from her own confusion, we are taking a necessary legal step today. We want to do this in front of our beloved community so there are no secrets. Transparency is the highest form of love. Victoria unlatched her leather briefcase and extracted a thick stack of documents bound in a blue folder. She placed the papers directly on the table in front of Helen. The notary stepped forward and uncapped a pen. "This is a durable power of attorney and a voluntary conservatorship consent form," Victoria announced to the silent room. "By signing this today, Gramma is allowing me to step in and manage her estate, her medical decisions, and her financial future. It is a compassionate transition." The trap was fully sprung. Victoria looked directly at me. Her eyes dared me to object. She had engineered a scenario where any resistance on my part would look like a hysterical outburst. If I argued, I would appear irrational and selfish in front of 30 witnesses. If I stayed quiet, she would secure the legal authority to liquidate the house and empty the retirement accounts by Monday morning. The social pressure in the room was a tangible, crushing weight. Everyone waited for my reaction. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The legs of the chair scraped against the hardwood floor. I did not rush. I smoothed the front of my dress and walked toward the head of the table. My heart beat with a slow, icy rhythm. 5 years of biting my tongue. 5 years of enduring their gaslighting, all distilled into a single moment of procedural execution. "I am afraid we will need to pause this compassionate transition," I said. My voice was level, unhurried, and projected clearly across the silent dining room. Barbara stepped forward, her silk tunic rustling. "Alethea, please do not ruin this beautiful moment. Your sister is taking on a heavy burden for you. Just sit down and let the healing happen." I ignored my mother. I reached into my pocket and retrieved my phone. I unlocked the screen and opened the secure file containing the digitized copy of the medical affidavit. I did not look at Victoria. I looked directly at the notary who was holding the pen over the legal documents. As a licensed clinical research coordinator, I have a professional obligation to inform you that the subject at this table is not legally eligible to sign those documents, I stated. Victoria let out a sharp, condescending laugh. "You are a trial nurse, Alethea. You are not a doctor, and you certainly do not dictate probate law. Gramma is signing the paperwork." I scrolled to the second page of the secure document. I held the phone up, reading the text with cold precision. "This is a notarized medical affidavit executed less than 48 hours ago by Dr. Eris Thorne, the Chief of Geriatric Psychiatry for the Pacific Northwest Hospital Network." I read aloud. The text states, quote, "The patient Helen is cognitively pristine. She possesses flawless executive function and total financial awareness. She suffers from zero cognitive decline." End quote. The room grew impossibly quiet. The only sound was the rhythmic hum of the oxygen concentrator down the hallway. I scrolled down to the final paragraph of the doctor's sworn statement. I raised my eyes and locked my gaze onto the notary. "The affidavit concludes with the following legal directive," I continued, my voice echoing off the antique plaster walls. Quote, Any attempt by family members to compel signatures regarding financial or medical authority under the false pretense of dementia constitutes fraudulent coercion and is legally actionable as elder financial exploitation." End quote. The color drained from the notary's face. The woman took a rapid step backward away from the table. In her profession, a notarized signature obtained under fraudulent coercion meant the permanent loss of her license and potential felony accessory charges. "I am not stamping those documents," the notary stammered, her voice shaking. She shoved her pen into her blazer pocket. "I was told this was a voluntary consent for a declining relative. I will not be a party to financial exploitation." The woman turned on her heel and practically sprinted toward the foyer. The heavy oak front door opened and slammed shut. The silence that followed her departure was absolute. 30 guests sat paralyzed in their chairs. The narrative Barbara had spent all evening weaving was publicly dismantled by a single paragraph of medical evidence. The friends and colleagues who had offered sympathetic sighs just moments ago were now staring at my mother and sister with profound shock and growing disgust. Victoria's corporate mask dissolved. The calculated professional composure she wore like armor fractured into jagged pieces. Her face flushed a deep mottled red. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You planned this," Victoria shrieked. The sudden volume of her voice made several guests flinch. "You manipulated a doctor into writing a fake evaluation. You are trying to steal my inheritance, you psychotic little martyr." I did not raise my voice. I did not frown. I simply looked at her with the clinical detachment I reserved for an anomalous data point. "The evaluation is real, Victoria," I replied softly, "and you cannot steal something that does not belong to you." Barbara tried to salvage the wreckage. She reached out toward the guests with trembling hands. "Please," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "There is a misunderstanding. Alethea is unwell. The stress of caregiving has broken her aura." No one moved to comfort her. The guests averted their eyes, staring down at their half-eaten desserts or looking uncomfortably toward the windows. The holistic facade was gone, replaced by the ugly, undeniable truth of their greed. Victoria grabbed the blue folder from the table. She hurled it across the room. The heavy documents scattered across the antique rug. She screamed a string of curses that echoed through the historic estate, shattering whatever residual illusion of spiritual harmony remained in the house. Her tech investors watched their polished, poised founder throw a feral temper tantrum over a thwarted robbery. I stood my ground, my posture relaxed, my phone back in my pocket. By refusing to match her volume, I magnified her instability. The public ambush had failed spectacularly. The immediate legal threat to my grandmother was neutralized, and the social standing my mother and sister prized above all else lay in ruins on the dining room floor. But a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind, and I knew Victoria would not leave Portland without trying to burn my life down with her. The Thanksgiving guests fled the historic estate before the pie was even sliced. Victoria drove her silver sports car back to Seattle that same night, her tires tearing deep ruts into the wet gravel. Barbara locked herself inside the guest suite and refused to come out. The weekend stretched into a hollow, echoing silence. I spent Saturday and Sunday sitting beside Helen's bed, checking her vitals and listening to the steady rain tap against the leaded glass. We had won the public battle, but I knew my sister well enough to understand that a humiliated corporate litigator does not surrender. She simply changes venues. Monday morning, I sat at the kitchen island with my cup of black coffee, preparing to log into my hospital network. I opened my secure clinical portal to check the overnight data for the pancreatic oncology trial. The screen flashed a red error code. My credentials were unrecognized. I refreshed the page. The same red text appeared. Access denied. Contact Human Resources. My phone vibrated on the marble counter. The caller ID displayed the main directory for the hospital administration building. I answered the call, and a cold, professional voice instructed me to report to the compliance office immediately. I was not to log into any trial databases. I was not to contact any of my colleagues. An hour later, I sat in a windowless room on the 7th floor of the hospital. The environment was sterile and unforgiving, illuminated by harsh fluorescent panels. Across the laminate table sat the Director of Human Resources and a senior compliance officer from the Oregon Medical Board. Neither of them offered me a cup of water or a polite greeting. "We received an anonymous tip through the state ethical reporting portal last night," the compliance officer began. He folded his hands over a manila folder. "The complaint alleges that you are systematically diverting Schedule II narcotics and investigational sedatives from your clinical trials." I stared at him. The sheer absurdity of the accusation paralyzed my vocal cords for a fraction of a second. "I am managing a pancreatic oncology study," I stated, keeping my voice low and measured. "Our investigational drugs are closely monitored. Every single milligram is accounted for in the double-blind pharmacy ledger. The anonymous report claims you are falsifying the pharmacy logs," the HR director added. Her tone was devoid of any warmth. "It alleges you are smuggling the diverted sedatives out of the facility to illegally drug your elderly grandmother, intentionally keeping her in a chemically induced fog to maintain control over her finances." The room tilted. The air in the small office grew thin and cold. Victoria had weaponized my own career against me. She could not steal the estate using probate law, so she decided to destroy my nursing license, face me with federal drug diversion charges, and remove me from the house by sending me to prison. If I was incarcerated, Helen would be left entirely defenseless, and Victoria could resume her hostile takeover. "Effective immediately, you are suspended without pay, pending a full state and federal investigation," the compliance officer said. He pushed a generic form across the table. "We need your security badge. If these allegations are substantiated, we will forward the findings to the district attorney." I unclipped my plastic identification badge from my lapel and placed it on the table. The plastic clicked against the laminate surface. I stood up, turned around, and walked out of the room. I navigated the hospital corridors in a state of suspended animation. I reached my car in the parking garage and sat behind the steering wheel. The concrete walls of the structure felt like a tomb. For 5 minutes, the crushing weight of the sabotage threatened to break my resolve. A decade of elite education, thousands of hours of patient care, my flawless professional reputation, all of it was hanging by a frayed thread because my sister knew how to file a fake ethical complaint. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Then the panic subsided, replaced by a familiar, icy determination. Victoria was a lawyer. She understood how to file allegations, but she did not understand clinical data, and she vastly underestimated my neurosis for documentation. I started the engine and drove straight to a private, independent diagnostic laboratory in downtown Portland. I paid out of pocket for a rapid, comprehensive toxicology panel. Then I drove back to the historic estate. Helen was sitting up in bed reading a novel when I walked into the master suite. I explained the situation without softening the edges. I told her Victoria accused me of poisoning her with stolen hospital narcotics. Helen closed her book. Her eyes narrowed into sharp, dark slits. "Draw the blood, Alethea," she commanded. I used a sterile butterfly needle from my personal medical kit to draw 2 vials of Helen's blood. I packed the samples into a temperature-controlled transport box and drove them directly back to the private lab, demanding a stat processing order. While I waited for the toxicology results, I returned to my encrypted laptop. I opened the Helen Estate audit protocol. I extracted 5 years of time-stamped vital signs care routines and behavioral observations. I cross-referenced those logs with my official hospital schedules. I compiled the data into a dense, undeniable forensic portfolio. On Wednesday morning, my phone chimed with an encrypted email from the diagnostic lab. I downloaded the official toxicology report. I printed the results on high-quality paper. I placed the document at the very front of my portfolio and drove back to the hospital administration building. I did not wait to be summoned. I walked past the reception desk and pushed the door to the compliance office open. The HR director and the board investigator looked up in shock as I dropped a heavy binder onto the laminate table. That is a comprehensive audit of my clinical trial inventory, I stated, pointing to the first section. You will find that every single dose of investigational medication over the last 36 months is verified by 2 independent pharmacy signatures. The inventory is flawless. There are 0 missing narcotics. The compliance officer reached for the binder, but I pressed my hand flat against the cover. The second section is my personal encrypted caregiving ledger. I continued. It details 5 years of round-the-clock vital sign tracking for my grandmother. But the most important document is on the very first page. I opened the binder and revealed the official laboratory printout. That is a comprehensive toxicology screen processed yesterday by an independent state-certified lab, I announced. The blood sample belongs to my grandmother. As you can clearly read, her system contains 0 traces of sedatives, opioids, or any investigational narcotics. She is chemically pristine. The anonymous tip you received is a fabricated retaliatory lie designed to trigger a false investigation. The HR director reviewed the toxicology report. The harsh lines of her face softened into genuine surprise. This is extraordinary documentation, Alethea. But we still have to follow procedure regarding anonymous ethical complaints. We have to identify the source to officially close the inquiry. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was the signal I had been waiting for since Monday afternoon. I pulled the device out and swiped the screen to answer. I placed the call on speakerphone and set the device on the table. "Jasmine," I said, "do you have the origin data?" My cousin's voice echoed in the sterile office, sharp and laced with corporate authority. "I do." The Oregon Medical Board Ethical Reporting Portal uses a standard encryption protocol, but it logs the incoming IP addresses for security purposes. I cross-referenced the digital footprint of the anonymous complaint submitted on Sunday evening. The compliance officer leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the phone. "The tip was not submitted from a local Portland address," Jasmine explained. "The IP address pings directly back to a dedicated commercial server located in downtown Seattle. Specifically, the secure network belonging to Victoria Legal Consulting, LLC. The person who filed this false medical claim was your sister." I ended the call and slid the phone back into my pocket. I looked at the 2 administrators. "I believe that concludes the investigation." The silence in the room was a different kind of quiet than the one I experienced on Monday. This was the quiet of total administrative surrender. The HR director stood up and offered a profound, apologetic nod. She returned my plastic security badge. "You are fully exonerated, Alethea. Furthermore, your meticulous approach to data tracking and compliance is exactly what this hospital needs. We are restructuring the Oversight Committee next month. I want you to step into the role of Director of Clinical Compliance. It comes with a significant salary increase and a dedicated office." I clipped the badge back onto my lapel. I thanked them for their time and walked out of the building. I had faced a career-ending threat and walked away with a promotion. Victoria launched a vicious attack, hoping to ruin my life. But all she accomplished was proving her own sheer malice on a traceable digital record. Any lingering sympathy the universe might have held for her was permanently erased. I drove back to the estate feeling a crisp sense of finality. The legal shield was intact, the financial audit was secure, and the professional sabotage was neutralized. I walked through the heavy oak door, ready to tell Helen that we had won another round. But when I reached the master suite, the victory turned to ash in my mouth. Helen was not reading her novel. She was slumped against the pillows, her chest rising and falling with a terrifying labored shallowness. The pristine cognitive mask she had worn for months was slipping, replaced by the undeniable reality of an aging body that could no longer sustain the fight. The fake decline my family had weaponized was suddenly becoming a terrifying reality. I dropped my hospital bag onto the hardwood floor of the foyer. The quiet victory I carried from the administration building shattered the moment I crossed the threshold of the master suite. Helen was no longer acting. The calculated sharpness in her eyes was gone. A clouded, frantic search for oxygen replaced her usual clarity. Her chest heaved with a shallow, irregular rhythm. The fake decline my mother and sister had weaponized to steal her estate was suddenly becoming a terrifying biological reality. I rushed to the bedside, securing the medical-grade cannula over her ears and cranking the flow dial to its maximum therapeutic output. Her breathing stabilized into a harsh rasp. I held her fragile wrist, feeling her pulse thready and weak beneath her translucent skin. The human body does not respect courtroom victories or financial audits. It follows its own inescapable clock. I contacted the hospital Human Resources Department the next morning. Using my newly appointed leverage as the incoming Director of Clinical Compliance, I secured an immediate, indefinite, formal leave of absence. I transformed the historic bedroom into a fully functional hospice unit. I rented a mechanized bed to elevate her upper body. I arranged for automated medication dispensers and stocked the mahogany nightstands with sublingual morphine, sterile sponges, and liquid nutrition. The battle to protect her assets ended. The struggle to preserve her dignity began. Nursing a loved one at the end of life is not glamorous. It does not resemble the spiritual transition Barbara wrote about on her wellness blogs. It is a grueling, visceral marathon. I barely slept. I set alarms for 2-hour intervals to physically turn Helen's frame, placing soft wedges under her hips to prevent pressure wounds. I swabbed her dry mouth with water-soaked sponges. I charted her respiratory rate in my digital ledger, no longer collecting evidence for a judge, but documenting the final chapters of a profound existence. The winter crept into the Pacific Northwest, covering the estate gardens in a thick layer of white frost. Inside the house, the world shrank to the size of a single room, illuminated by an amber bedside lamp. The scent of eucalyptus faded, replaced by the sterile, clinical odor of antibacterial wipes and medical-grade saline. My lower back ached with a constant dull throb. My hands cracked from endless washings. Yet beneath the physical exhaustion, I felt a deep, quiet honor. I was executing the exact duty my family claimed to revere, but I was doing it without an audience. I was doing it because it was required. 2 weeks into the hospice routine, the heavy brass knocker on the front door sounded. I opened it to find Barbara and Victoria standing on the porch. It was their first visit since the disastrous Thanksgiving dinner. They were dressed in coordinated, subdued designer knitwear, projecting an aesthetic of wealthy, weary mourners. They bypassed me without a greeting and glided down the hallway toward the master suite. I followed them, my jaw locked tight. Helen was deeply unconscious, sedated by a required dose of pain medication to ease her breathing. She looked painfully thin, her silver hair brushed neatly against the pillow. Barbara did not ask about the dosage schedule. Victoria did not inquire about her oxygen saturation. Instead, my sister pulled a slim smartphone from her designer handbag. Barbara leaned over the mattress, placing her cheek inches from Helen's sleeping face. She arranged her features into a mask of profound, tragic sorrow. Victoria snapped 3 quick photographs. Then they switched positions. Victoria sat on the edge of the bed, holding Helen's limp hand, while Barbara captured the image. They were manufacturing digital grief. They needed the social media currency to maintain their public identities as devoted, heartbroken relatives. They stayed in the house for exactly 14 minutes. They did not offer to wash a single linen or fetch a fresh glass of water. As Victoria walked out the door, she tapped away on her screen. She posted the images to her online networks with a lengthy caption about the heavy spiritual weight of familial duty and the pain of letting go. I watched their luxury vehicles pull out of the driveway, struck by the sickening contrast between my quiet, grueling labor and their superficial, materialistic performance. They treated their own mother's deathbed as a photo opportunity. I locked the door behind them and returned to the quiet sanctuary of the bedroom. I sat in the armchair beside the bed, listening to the mechanical hum of the equipment. Hours bled into the evening. The sky outside turned a deep, bruised purple. The frost on the window panes thickened into ice. Just past midnight, the rhythm of Helen's breathing shifted. It grew softer, spacing out into long, quiet pauses. I stood up and leaned over the bed, taking her hand in mine. Her eyelids fluttered open. For one brief, impossible moment, the heavy fog of the medication cleared. The sharp, brilliant matriarch looked up at me. She squeezed my fingers with the last reserve of her strength. "Let them dig their own graves," Helen whispered. Her voice was barely a breath, but the command was unmistakable. It was her final tactical directive. She knew the trap we built in the lawyer's office was waiting. She knew her death would trigger the mechanism. She closed her eyes. 2 minutes later, she exhaled her final breath. The room fell entirely silent, save for the hum of the concentrator pushing air into an empty mask. I did not cry immediately. The grief was too large, too heavy to process in the immediate aftermath. I performed the final clinical duties with profound respect. I bathed her face, smoothed the quilt, and recorded the official time of passing in my ledger. The era of caregiving survival was officially over. The emotional core of the historic estate was gone. I picked up my phone and dialed the mortuary to arrange the transport. As the operator answered the line, the quiet sorrow in my chest began to harden into a cold, unbreakable armor. The physical suffering had concluded, but the impending legal explosion was counting down to zero. My family believed they were about to inherit an empire. They had no idea they were about to inherit their own ruin. The transport vehicle departed the property just before dawn, carrying my grandmother's remains into the cold December morning. The silence that followed was profound, the kind of quiet that settles into the foundation of a house after a long war ends. That peace lasted exactly 6 hours. By noon, Barbara and Victoria descended upon the historic estate, bringing a clipboard bearing event planner and a caterer. The mourning process was immediately hijacked and weaponized into a high society networking exhibition. They did not ask me what Helen might have wanted. They did not consult the careful notes I had kept regarding her favorite local musicians, or the simple, understated burial she once mentioned during a rare, lucid afternoon. Barbara commandeered the arrangements with the frantic energy of a gala chairperson. She booked a sprawling, glass-enclosed botanical conservatory in the West Hills of Portland. She ordered thousands of dollars worth of imported white orchids, justifying the steep carbon footprint by claiming the blossoms possessed a specific frequency necessary to guide Helen's spirit into the next realm. Victoria viewed the funeral through a different lens. For my sister, the memorial was a prime opportunity to rehabilitate her fractured public image and court new venture capital for her sinking software firm. She invited senior partners from her Seattle law firm, wealthy tech investors, and local politicians. The guest list swelled to over 200 people. The gathering transformed from a solemn tribute to an elite corporate mixer dripping with performative grief. I received the printed program on the morning of the service. I stood in the foyer of the estate, tracing my finger over the heavy, textured cardstock. The schedule of speakers was listed in embossed silver ink. Barbara's name was printed at the top, followed by a spiritual guide from her retreat center, and concluding with a keynote eulogy delivered by Victoria. My name did not appear anywhere on the itinerary. I had spent half a decade bathing the deceased, managing her oxygen, and tracking her vital signs through endless, sleepless nights. Yet in the official printed history of her death, I was reduced to a footnote, relegated to a silent observer in the back pew. I dressed in a simple black tailored suit and drove myself to the Botanical Conservatory. The venue was breathtaking, filled with natural light filtering through towering ferns and exotic palms. A string quartet played a melancholic classical arrangement near the entrance. Servers drifted through the crowd carrying trays of vegan hors d'oeuvres and sparkling mineral water. It looked like a luxury brand launch rather than a funeral. I chose a seat in the very last row of the wooden folding chairs, distancing myself from the center aisle. The extended family began to arrive, filing into the front rows with hushed whispers. These were aunts, uncles, and distant cousins who had not visited Helen in years. They had, however, received daily updates from Barbara. My mother had spent months cultivating a narrative where I was the unstable, rigid clinical daughter who isolated Helen from her spiritual community. A great aunt wearing a heavy wool coat spotted me in the back. She detoured from the main aisle and approached my chair. She offered a tight, sympathetic smile that did not reach her eyes. "It is for the best that you are sitting back here, Alethea," the aunt murmured, placing a patronizing hand on my shoulder. "Barbara told us how overwhelmed you became at the end. Your mother is so strong to take over the burden of the transition. You should use this time to reflect on your rigid energy. We all need to embrace forgiveness today." I looked up at her. I did not blink. I did not defend myself or list the thousands of hours of unseen labor I had provided. I simply let the silence stretch until her false sympathy fractured into deep discomfort. She withdrew her hand and hurried toward the front rows. The service commenced with a sprawling, disconnected speech from Barbara's spiritual guide, who spent 20 minutes discussing the cosmic vibration of the universe without mentioning Helen's actual life once. Barbara followed weeping, delicate tears into a lace handkerchief, spinning a fabricated tale of spending countless hours holding her mother's hand and sharing profound final conversations. I sat, stoic, a cold observer, noting every contradiction, every stolen valor. Then Victoria approached the podium. My sister wore an immaculate black designer sheath dress, projecting the image of a resilient corporate leader managing a profound personal tragedy. She adjusted the microphone and surveyed the audience, locking eyes with her Seattle investors in the second row. "My grandmother was a pioneer of this beautiful city," Victoria began, her voice steady and practiced. "She built a legacy of strength and prosperity. In her final months, as her mind slipped into a tragic fog, I realized the immense responsibility placed upon my shoulders. It is the duty of the eldest to step up, to protect the vulnerable, and to carry the family torch forward." Victoria paused, letting the silence emphasize her manufactured sacrifice. She gripped the edges of the wooden podium. "Helen loved her historic estate," Victoria continued, casting her gaze toward the vaulted glass ceiling. "And that property will not be sold to strangers. I am honoring her memory by ensuring the house remains our new family sanctuary. We are going to preserve the foundation, but we are also going to modernize it for the future. The old greenhouse will be dismantled to make way for a contemporary gathering space. The carriage house will be fully renovated. We will transform her aging relic into a modern haven, a place where our legacy can thrive for generations." A wave of approving murmurs rippled through the front rows. The tech investors nodded, impressed by her decisive management of prime real estate. Victoria was publicly staking her claim. She was standing over our grandmother's casket, announcing a multi-million-dollar renovation project for a property she believed she had successfully stolen. Her supreme arrogance filled the conservatory, thick and suffocating. I felt a subtle shift in the air next to me. Jasmine slipped quietly into the empty chair on my right. My cousin wore a sharp black blazer, her silver auditing briefcase resting discreetly near her boots. She had skipped the pre-service reception, arriving just in time to witness Victoria's grand declaration of ownership. Jasmine leaned closer, her shoulder brushing mine. She looked toward the podium where Victoria was receiving a polite, somber applause from the crowd. "She is practically measuring for drapes," Jasmine whispered, her tone laced with dark amusement. "She has no idea she is standing on a trap door." I kept my eyes fixed forward. The sheer audacity of Victoria's speech, the casual erasure of my caregiving, and the brazen public claim on the historic estate should have broken me. A month ago, sitting through this level of gaslighting would have triggered a panic attack. Now, armed with the notarized medical affidavit, the audited financial ledger, and the irrevocable trust secured in a subterranean vault, I felt nothing but a glacial, terrifying calm. "Let her remodel the house in her head," I replied, my voice so low only Jasmine could hear it. "Let her pick out the paint colors." Jasmine reached over and gave my arm a firm, grounding squeeze. The tension in the room was drawn tight, a bowstring pulled to its absolute limit. The antagonists were basking in the peak of their assumed victory, surrounded by a compliant audience, convinced they had outsmarted the quiet clinical nurse in the back row. They believed the game was finished. They were blind to the reality that the true reckoning had not yet begun. "Just wait," Jasmine murmured, settling back into her chair. The service concluded with a catered reception. I did not stay to mingle with the venture capitalists or the holistic gurus. I stood up, walked out of the glass conservatory, and drove back to the empty, quiet estate. Tomorrow, the probate waiting period would theoretically begin, but Victoria lacked the patience for legal timelines. Her arrogance demanded immediate gratification, and her hasty greed was about to trigger the catastrophic fall we had so meticulously prepared. The morning after the funeral, I woke up early. The Portland sky was a pale, bruised blue. I drank my coffee in the silent kitchen of the historic estate. I had spent the night packing my clinical trial notes and finalizing the encrypted ledger. Today was supposed to be a day of quiet transition. Instead, the silence was shattered at 8 in the morning by the unmistakable grinding roar of a heavy diesel engine. I walked out the back door and stood on the stone patio. A commercial demolition crew had parked a large yellow backhoe on the manicured rear lawn. Deep tire treads tore through the frost-covered grass. 3 men in high-visibility vests were unloading sledgehammers and steel scaffolding near the historic 1920s glass greenhouse. Standing near the rose bushes holding a steaming cup of artisan coffee was Victoria. She wore designer denim and a pristine white wool coat. She was pointing at the intricate glass panels of the greenhouse, giving rapid instructions to a man wearing a hard hat. Barbara sat nearby on a teak garden bench, wrapped in a pashmina shawl, nodding in serene approval as the foreman marked the glass with neon spray paint. I walked across the ruined lawn. The cold morning air bit at my face, but my heart maintained a slow, steady rhythm. I did not yell over the roar of the diesel engine. I simply stepped between the backhoe and the greenhouse, forcing the operator to hit the brakes. The machine lurched to a halt. The sudden silence in the garden was heavy and tense. "What are you doing?" the foreman asked, lowering his clipboard. "You need to turn off that equipment and remove it from this property," I said, keeping my voice level and clear. "You do not have authorization to demolish any structures on this land." Victoria sighed loudly and marched across the grass. Her designer boots crushed the frost-covered weeds. She positioned herself between me and the foreman, adopting the stance of a seasoned corporate litigator handling a nuisance lawsuit. "Ignore her," Victoria told the foreman, waving her hand dismissively. "She is my younger sister. She has been under a tremendous amount of stress, and her grip on reality is currently fractured. I am the executor of the estate and the legal owner of this property. Proceed with the demolition." The foreman looked back and forth between us, clearly uncomfortable with the family dispute. I turned my attention directly to the foreman. My tone carried the precise, authoritative weight I use to manage non-compliant patients in the oncology ward. "If you swing a hammer at that glass, you will be committing felony property damage," I stated. "This woman does not own this estate. She has not filed a single probate document with the county clerk. If you proceed, I will hold your contracting company financially liable for every broken pane of historic glass." The foreman swallowed hard. He signaled to his crew to lower their tools. "We are going to wait until you folks sort this out," he muttered, stepping back toward his truck. Victoria's face hardened. The polite, sophisticated mask she wore at the funeral vanished, replaced by a cold, sneering contempt. She stepped closer to me, invading my personal space. "You are making a fool of yourself," Alethea, Victoria hissed. Her breath plumed in the cold air. "Gramma is gone. Your little caregiving gig is over. You do not have any power here anymore. I am giving you exactly 4 hours to pack your bags and vacate the guest bedroom. If you are not gone by noon, I am changing the locks and throwing your medical scrubs onto the street." Barbara drifted over from the teak bench. She placed a hand on Victoria's arm, offering me a look of profound pity. "You need to surrender to the flow of the universe, darling," Barbara murmured. "The stagnant energy of this greenhouse must be cleared to make way for new healing vibrations. Do not fight the transition. Let it go." I looked at my mother, then back to my sister. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. "I am not leaving," I said. And you are both trespassing." Victoria let out a sharp, breathless laugh. Her eyes widened with genuine disbelief. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her smartphone. "You have lost your mind," she stated, tapping the screen with a manicured finger. "I tried to do this the compassionate way, but if you want to play games, I will have the authorities remove you. I am calling the police right now." "Do it," I replied, folding my arms across my chest. "Tell them to hurry." Victoria glared at me, unnerved by my lack of panic. She dialed the emergency number and held the phone to her ear. She paced back and forth across the ruined lawn, feeding the dispatcher a fabricated story. She claimed a disgruntled, estranged relative was causing a disturbance, threatening commercial contractors, and refusing to leave a private residence. She used her most polished, professional tone, establishing herself as the victimized property owner. We waited in the cold morning air. The demolition crew sat on the bumpers of their trucks, smoking cigarettes and watching us with quiet apprehension. Barbara retreated to her bench, closing her eyes to meditate through the negative conflict. I stood my ground near the glass greenhouse, feeling the heavy manila folder tucked safely inside my coat. 20 minutes later, 2 Portland police cruisers pulled through the front gates. The tires crunched over the gravel driveway. 2 uniformed officers stepped out and walked toward the backyard. Victoria immediately rushed forward to intercept them. She extended her hand, introducing herself as a corporate attorney. She spoke in a calm, measured cadence, painting a picture of a tragic family situation. "My grandmother just passed away," Victoria explained, gesturing toward me with a sorrowful nod. "I am stepping in to manage the estate renovations. Unfortunately, my sister is struggling with severe grief and refuses to accept the reality of the transition. She is disrupting my contractors and refusing to vacate the premises. I need her escorted off the property so we can proceed with the work." The older of the 2 officers nodded sympathetically. He walked across the lawn and stopped a few feet in front of me. He placed his thumbs in his duty belt. "Ma'am," the officer said gently, "I understand this is a difficult time for your family, but if your sister is the executor of the estate, you cannot interfere with the property management. I need to ask you to gather your belongings and leave the premises." I looked the officer in the eye. "She is not the executor," I replied, my voice steady and polite, "and this property is not currently in probate. My sister does not own this land. She has no legal right to authorize demolition." Victoria scoffed loudly. "She is delusional, officer. The deed is in my grandmother's name. As the eldest heir, the property defaults to my control until the probate courts process the final paperwork. Remove her." The officer frowned. He pulled a small notepad from his pocket. "Ma'am, do you have any identification on you?" he asked me. I unzipped my coat. I retrieved my driver's license and handed it to him. Then I pulled out the heavy manila folder. I extracted a thick legal document stamped with the official seal of the county clerk. "This is a legally recorded transfer on death deed," I explained, handing the document to the officer. "It was executed by my grandmother and filed with the county records office prior to her passing. As of her time of death, the full legal ownership of this historic estate transferred directly to me. It bypasses probate entirely. I am the sole owner of this property." The officer reviewed the document. His eyes scanned the crisp legal text, the notarized signatures, and the raised county seal. He pulled his radio from his shoulder and requested dispatch to verify the deed status with the county clerk's office. We stood in tense silence. Victoria crossed her arms, her face pale but defiant. "It is a fake," she muttered, though her voice lacked its previous confident bite. She printed something off the internet. "It means nothing." The radio crackled. The dispatcher confirmed the recording number. The deed was authentic. Filed and legally binding, the property belonged exclusively to Alethea Elizabeth. The officer handed the documents back to me. He turned around and faced Victoria. The sympathetic demeanor he previously displayed was gone, replaced by strict law enforcement protocol. "Man," the officer said to Victoria, According to county records, your sister is the sole legal owner of this estate. You do not have the authority to order demolition, and you do not have the right to be here without her permission. You and your contractors are trespassing." The foreman did not wait for another warning. He whistled sharply to his crew. The men scrambled into their trucks, threw the backhoe into reverse, and drove off the lawn as fast as the heavy machinery allowed. They wanted no part in a felony property dispute. Victoria stood frozen, her reality fractured. The entire legal framework she had built in her mind, the guaranteed inheritance, the multi-million-dollar real estate flip, shattered into jagged pieces on the frost-covered grass. Her eyes darted from the retreating trucks to the police officers, and finally to me. "No," Victoria shouted, her voice shrill and desperate. "This is illegal. You forged those signatures." Grandma was out of her mind. She did not know what she was signing. "You manipulated a dying woman to steal my inheritance." Barbara abandoned her meditation. She ran across the lawn, her pashmina shawl trailing behind her in the mud. "Alethea, what have you done?" Barbara cried out, her spiritual facade crumbling into raw panic. "This house belongs to the family. You cannot take it for yourself." I looked at my mother and my sister. They were unraveling in front of 2 police officers, exposing the ugly truth of their greed. I did not forge anything I said, keeping my voice clinical and cold. The documents were drafted by Silas Montgomery, one of the top estate litigators in Portland, and they were authenticated by an independent geriatric psychiatrist who swore, under oath, that Grandma was of pristine sound mind. Victoria lunged forward, her hands curled into claws. The younger police officer immediately stepped into her path, holding up a hand to stop her advance. "Step back, ma'am," the officer warned, his hand resting near his belt. "You need to leave the property right now, or you will be placed under arrest for trespassing." Victoria stopped. Her chest heaved. Her designer coat was splattered with mud from the ruined lawn. "I demand a formal will reading," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "I am calling Silas Montgomery. I am hauling you into court. I will spend every dime I have to prove those documents are fraudulent." I placed the manila folder back inside my coat. I looked at her with the same detached observation I gave to a failed clinical trial. "You do not need to call Silas," I replied quietly. "He is already expecting us." "The formal reading is scheduled for 2 o'clock this afternoon at his downtown office. You are welcome to attend, Victoria, but you are going to leave my property right now." The officers escorted them to their vehicles. I stood near the historic greenhouse and watched their luxury cars retreat down the gravel driveway, escorted by a Portland police cruiser. The initial skirmish was over, but the true devastation, the forensic trap we had built in the subterranean vault, was waiting for them in the city. The elevator doors slid open on the 40th floor of the downtown Portland high-rise. I walked into the reception area of the law firm with Jasmine walking a half step behind me. She carried her silver auditing briefcase. The receptionist escorted us silently down the corridor toward the corner conference room. When we entered, Barbara and Victoria were already seated on the far side of the massive, polished granite table. The morning eviction at the historic estate had clearly enraged my sister, but the drive into the financial district had given her time to reconstruct her corporate armor. Victoria wore a fresh, tailored blazer. She was sipping sparkling mineral water from a crystal glass. Her posture radiated smug certainty. She believed the police incident was a temporary hurdle, a minor delay in her inevitable victory. Barbara sat next to her, adjusting a woven shawl, her face set in a tight mask of forced tranquility. Silas Montgomery sat at the head of the table. The senior estate litigator wore a dark, immaculate suit. His hands rested flat on a thick leather portfolio. He did not offer condolences. He did not ask how anyone was feeling. He operated entirely on the currency of legal execution. I pulled out a heavy leather chair and sat directly across from my sister. Jasmine took the seat beside me, placing her silver briefcase onto the granite surface with a soft thud. Victoria did not wait for Silas to begin. She set her water glass down and leaned forward, adopting the tone of a senior partner directing a junior associate. "Let us make this quick. Silas Victoria stated. Her voice was brisk and demanding. My sister had a hysterical episode at the property this morning and brandished a fraudulent transfer deed. I need you to produce my grandmother's actual last will and testament right now. I am the eldest heir. I require the primary keys to the estate, the alarm codes, and the executor paperwork so I can begin the probate filings before the weekend. We have contractors waiting. Silas Montgomery looked at Victoria. His expression did not change. He did not scramble to comply. He reached out and pressed a small silver button embedded in the surface of the conference table. The heavy motorized blinds on the floor-to-ceiling windows hummed as they lowered, casting the room into dim shadows. A large motorized projection screen descended from a hidden compartment in the ceiling. You are not receiving any keys today, Victoria Silas said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone that commanded the quiet room. You are not receiving the alarm codes, and you will not be filing any documents with the probate court. Victoria's confident smile faltered. What are you talking about? I'm her granddaughter. Oregon law dictates the line of succession. Oregon law dictates intestate succession when a person dies without a plan, Silas corrected. Your grandmother possessed a very precise plan. She did not leave a standard will for you to contest. Silas tapped a key on his laptop. A high-resolution image of a legal document illuminated the projection screen. The text was sharp and undeniable. The header read, Irrevocable Living Trust. 10 days before her passing, Helen executed a comprehensive restructuring of her entire financial portfolio. Silas explained, gesturing toward the glowing screen. She transferred the historic estate and all liquid assets into this trust. This entity bypasses the probate system entirely. The property you attempted to demolish this morning ceased to belong to Helen as an individual while she was still alive. It belonged to the trust, which immediately transferred ownership to Alethea upon her passing. Barbara gripped the edge of the granite table. Her knuckles turned white. That is impossible, Barbara gasped. She was out of her mind. She thought the grocery clerk was charging too much for apples. You cannot execute a trust with a woman who has dementia. It is legal fraud. Silas tapped another key. The image on the screen shifted to the notarized medical affidavit signed by Dr. Eris Thorne. Your mother anticipated that exact accusation. Silas replied coldly. This is a sworn psychiatric evaluation conducted by the Chief of Geriatric Psychiatry for the Regional Hospital Network. It was executed the day before she signed the trust. It proves unequivocally that Helen possessed flawless executive function. Her cognitive baseline was pristine. Your claims of dementia are medically baseless. Victoria stared at the screen. Her breathing grew shallow. She realized her primary strategy, the assumption of cognitive decline, was legally dead. But she was a litigator. She pivoted her attack instantly. Fine, Victoria snapped, her voice rising in pitch. She was competent. But that just means Alethea exerted undue influence over a vulnerable elder. My sister isolated her, manipulated her, and forced her to sign away our family legacy. I will file a civil suit for undue influence tomorrow morning. I will tie that trust up in litigation for 10 years. You will never see a dime, Alethea. Silas Montgomery leaned forward. The predatory spark I had seen during our first meeting returned to his dark eyes. You cannot sue for undue influence regarding a gift, Silas stated, because this estate transfer is not a gift. He tapped the keyboard one final time. The screen displayed the specific distribution clause Helen had dictated in his office. Silas cleared his throat and read the passage aloud, letting the devastating words echo off the dark-paneled walls. To my daughter Barbara and my granddaughter Victoria, I leave exactly what they earned, the sum total of $0.00. Silas read, the historic property and all remaining trust assets are transferred entirely to Alethea Elizabeth. This transfer is not a familial inheritance. It is retroactive, calculated compensation for 5 years of elite, unpaid clinical care. The estate is hereby settling a documented medical debt. The words hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. Helen had reached from beyond the grave to deliver the final verdict. She recognized my silent, grueling labor, and she legally quantified it. You cannot contest the payment of a valid debt in probate court, Victoria Silas added softly. If you sue the estate, you are suing a creditor. And if you somehow manage to break the trust, the estate would still owe Alethea over $800,000 in back pay for round-the-clock nursing services. You would inherit a negative balance. You would owe her money. Victoria's jaw trembled. The impenetrable fortress of contract law surrounded her, cutting off every avenue of escape. But her greed refused to surrender. She slammed her hands onto the granite table. "This is a joke," Victoria screamed. "I am not walking away from a multi-million-dollar property because my sister kept a fake diary of sponge baths. I will drag all of you through discovery. I will subpoena every bank record. I will tear this family apart in public." I looked at Jasmine. My cousin reached out and unlatched the heavy silver locks on her auditing briefcase. They clicked open with a sharp, metallic snap. Jasmine extracted a thick bound dossier and slid it across the smooth granite surface. It came to a stop directly in front of Victoria's clenched fists. "I highly recommend you avoid opening your bank records to the public," Victoria Jasmine said. Her tone was the epitome of corporate detachment. "What is this?" Victoria demanded, glaring at the dossier. "That is a forensic financial audit," Silas answered. I sat perfectly still, watching the color drain from my mother's face. Over the last 3 years, Barbara utilized a fraudulent shell company named Radiant Energy Solutions to funnel $120,000 out of Helen's retirement accounts. Silas explained, his voice taking on the sharp edge of a prosecutor. She billed her own mother for phantom holistic therapies. The audit traces every single stolen dollar through intermediate accounts directly into the primary operating fund of Victoria Legal Consulting, LLC. Barbara let out a strange, high-pitched whimpering sound. She pulled her woven shawl tight around her shoulders, shrinking into her heavy leather chair. "You funded your tech startup with stolen money." Victoria Silas continued tapping his gold pen against his portfolio. "You furnished your Seattle penthouse using funds designated for hospice care. You and your mother orchestrated a systematic pipeline of elder financial exploitation. The evidence in that dossier includes wire transfer receipts, IP addresses, and routing numbers. It is an airtight prosecutorial package." Victoria looked down at the bound document. She did not reach for it. She stared at it as if it were a live explosive. "Here are the final terms of this transition," Silas stated, delivering the ultimate blow. "You will hand over the keys to the estate right now. You will sign a waiver relinquishing any future claims against the trust. If you refuse, or if you file a single piece of litigation against Alethea, I will personally hand-deliver this forensic audit to the district attorney. You will both face felony charges for grand theft and elder abuse. You will lose your law license, Victoria. You will both go to federal prison." The trap snapped shut. There was no wiggle room, no negotiation, and no possibility of appeal. The legal architecture was flawless, backed by undeniable financial proof. Victoria collapsed backward into her chair. All the air rushed out of her lungs in a ragged, hollow gasp. Her eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated shock. The reality of her total defeat finally penetrated her arrogant armor. She looked at the dossier, then at Silas, and finally at me. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She was completely neutralized, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of her own exposed corruption. Barbara, however, did not freeze. The holistic, serene facade she had maintained for decades shattered into a million jagged pieces. The spiritual guru vanished, replaced by a desperate, cornered thief. Barbara slammed her fists onto the table and began to sob. It was not the delicate, performative weeping she displayed at the funeral. It was a raw, ugly, guttural rage. She screamed about how unfair her life had been, about how she deserved the money for enduring the toxic energy of her own mother. She wailed, her face contorted, her tears ruining the expensive fabric of her tunic. I sat across from them, my hands folded neatly on my lap. I did not feel pity. I did not feel guilt. The empathy they had weaponized against me for 5 years was entirely gone. I watched my mother sob and my sister gasp for air, observing them with the exact same clinical detachment I used to monitor a failed biological variable. The tumor had been successfully excised, and the patient was finally free. Victoria reached into her designer handbag with shaking fingers. She pulled out a heavy ring of brass keys and threw them across the table. They slid across the granite and stopped inches from my hands. I reached out and closed my fingers around the cold metal, feeling the quiet, solid weight of my grandmother's true legacy. I left the downtown high-rise with the heavy ring of brass keys resting deep in my coat pocket. The drive back to the historic property felt fundamentally altered. The lingering weight of 5 years of emotional exploitation had evaporated into the cold winter air. I pulled through the wrought iron gates and parked near the carriage house. Barbara had occupied the detached guest suite for the past 3 weeks, claiming the main house held too much transitional sorrow. I knew she was simply waiting for Victoria to clear me out. Now, the dynamic was reversed. I walked to the guest suite and unlocked the door with my new keys. The interior was a chaotic landscape of half-packed designer luggage. Barbara was frantically folding her imported linen tunics and wrapping her crystal singing bowls in bubble wrap. She stopped when I entered the room. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, but the sorrow was purely selfish. She did not mourn my grandmother. She mourned her severed access to a limitless bank account. "You are throwing your own mother onto the street?" Barbara whispered, gripping a woven hemp blanket against her chest. "I raised you to possess a compassionate spirit, Alethea. This home is supposed to be a sanctuary for our family. You are destroying our karma." I stood in the doorway. The weaponized guilt that used to paralyze my vocal cords held zero power over me. I looked at the stolen vintage Cartier watch, still wrapped around her wrist. "Leave the watch on the dresser, Mom," I said. My voice was calm and steady. "Silas gave you 48 hours to vacate the premises before he files the financial exploitation charges with the district attorney. You have 20 minutes. Barbara stared at me. She searched my face for any trace of the compliant, exhausted daughter she had manipulated for half a decade. She found nothing but the cold procedural gaze of a clinical trial manager. Her hands shook as she unclasped the gold watch and placed it on the wooden dresser. She zipped her suitcases, dragged them past me without another word, and loaded them into her hybrid vehicle. I stood on the driveway and watched her drive away. I did not feel a single pang of regret. I locked the guest house and walked back to the main estate. The legal trap we built in the law office executed its design flawlessly over the next month. Victoria returned to Seattle, desperate for capital to save her failing software company. Without the historic estate to leverage, her startup faced an immediate liquidity crisis. Her primary investors demanded a full accounting of the initial seed money. In a desperate attempt to buy time, Victoria filed a motion in a Washington civil court attempting to restructure her business debt. That legal maneuver proved to be her ultimate undoing. During the discovery phase of the civil hearing, the opposing counsel subpoenaed her corporate operating accounts. The forensic invoice Jasmine had audited became a mandatory piece of the public legal filing. The meticulous paper trail of fake holistic invoices and stolen retirement funds was entered into the public record for every corporate litigator in Seattle to read. The fallout was swift and merciless. Victoria's prestigious law firm did not tolerate partners embroiled in documented elder financial abuse. The senior partners convened an emergency board meeting and severed her partnership within 24 hours. Her tech investors pulled their remaining capital and filed separate fraud charges against her shell company. The sleek, minimalist penthouse she had furnished with Helen's hospice funds was listed for short sale to cover her mounting legal debts. Victoria spent her entire adult life chasing corporate wealth and projecting an image of untouchable success. The clinical documentation of her own greed dismantled her empire in a matter of weeks. Barbara faced a different kind of ruin in Portland. The progressive, eco-conscious community she worshipped operated on a strict currency of authentic empathy and spiritual integrity. The holistic circles in the Pacific Northwest are tight-knit, and gossip travels faster than a winter storm. When the details of the public court filings in Seattle drifted down the coast, the truth of Barbara's performative compassion was laid bare. The retreat center she frequented quietly canceled her memberships. The organic wellness gurus who had attended the Thanksgiving dinner stopped returning her phone calls. They realized the serene daughter who spoke endlessly about guiding her mother's spiritual transition had actually stolen $120,000 while leaving the physical labor to her exhausted child. Barbara was ostracized from the only community she valued. She moved into a small rented apartment in a distant suburb, stripped of her stolen wealth and her manufactured social standing. By early spring, the historic estate had undergone a profound physical and emotional restoration. I hired a specialized crew to dismantle the hospital infrastructure in the master suite. The motorized medical bed, the plastic oxygen tubing, and the sterile supply carts were removed. I painted the walls a warm, inviting shade of cream and brought in antique wooden furniture that matched the original 1920s architecture. The scent of harsh antibacterial wipes faded, replaced by the natural aroma of the blooming rose bushes drifting through the open windows. I transitioned into my new role as the Director of Clinical Compliance at the hospital. The promotion provided a substantial salary, meaning I did not need to touch the remaining liquid assets in the irrevocable trust. I earmarked those funds exclusively for the long-term preservation of the property. On a warm Friday evening in May, I hosted a private dinner in the formal dining room. I did not invite 30 performative guests or holistic strangers. The mahogany table was set for 3. My cousin Jasmine and her husband David flew up from San Francisco for the weekend. David had remained detached from the family drama for years, shielding himself from the toxic favoritism by building a quiet life in California. But sitting at the table, pouring a rich red wine into crystal glasses, the distance felt bridged. Jasmine sat across from me, her sharp corporate demeanor softened by a genuine, relaxed smile. We did not speak about Barbara or Victoria. We did not waste our breath on the ruins of their lives. We spoke about my new compliance protocols at the hospital, about David's upcoming architectural projects, and about the intricate flavor of the roasted vegetables I had prepared. The house was filled with the sound of real, authentic laughter. The suffocating tension that had poisoned the plaster walls for 5 years was entirely gone. After dessert, David and Jasmine moved to the parlor to listen to a vintage vinyl record. I stepped out through the French doors onto the back patio. The night air was cool and crisp. The historic glass greenhouse stood intact near the edge of the manicured lawn, its panes reflecting the soft silver light of the moon. I walked to the edge of the stone patio and took a deep breath. For half a decade, I had walked this property as a prisoner to my own empathy. I had allowed my family to weaponize my clinical skills and my quiet devotion. They assumed my silence meant I was weak. They mistook my professional restraint for submission. I looked up at the second-story window of the master suite. I thought about the sharp, brilliant woman who had squeezed my hand in the dark and ordered me to let the hunters dig their own graves. Helen had trusted me to protect her dignity when she was physically vulnerable. In return, she handed me the sword to protect her legacy. I stood alone under the vast, quiet sky. I did not owe anyone a forced apology. I did not carry a single ounce of spiritual guilt. The property was mine, secured through undeniable medical data and ironclad contract law. The quiet workhorse of the family had kept the ledger, tallied the debts, and collected the final payment. I looked out over the sprawling, illuminated gardens, feeling the cool breeze against my face, finally recognizing myself as the absolute master of my own life. There is a profound, unsettling silence that follows the collapse of a family. It is not the sudden, violent crash of a falling tree, but the slow, inevitable crumbling of a house whose foundation has been consumed by rot for decades. The story of Alethea, her grandmother Helen, and the devastating betrayal perpetrated by her mother and sister is not merely a tale of forensic revenge or a legal thriller. It is a stark, unblinking mirror held up to the deepest fractures within modern American family dynamics. It forces us to look past the manicured lawns and the curated holiday photographs to ask a terrifying question. What happens when the people who are supposed to protect us decide that our empathy is a resource to be mined, exploited, and ultimately discarded? Through the lens of this quiet, devastating tragedy, we are called to examine the very fabric of our traditional family structures, our parenting values, and the spiritual decay that often hides behind the mask of material success. In contemporary American culture, there is a dangerous tendency to worship at the altar of prestige and corporate ambition. We celebrate the child who leaves home, secures the corner office in Seattle, and amasses wealth, often turning a blind eye to their ethical deficits. Meanwhile, the child who stays behind, the one who possesses the deep-seated empathy required to care for an aging elder, is routinely taken for granted. For parents, the most vital lesson pulled from the wreckage of this story is the catastrophic danger of toxic favoritism and the cowardice of prioritizing family harmony over actual justice. Barbara, the matriarch, weaponized Portland's progressive, compassionate culture to enslave her youngest daughter. She demanded spiritual grace while committing financial theft. Raising children with a foundation of honesty and fairness means recognizing that a quiet child is not a limitless well of sacrifice. Parents must understand that forcing one child to bear the grueling, unpaid physical and emotional weight of family duty, while allowing another to chase corporate prestige unburdened, is not parenting. It is emotional extortion. True family responsibility requires parents to hold their most successful children accountable and to fiercely protect the boundaries of their most empathetic children. If you build your family's peace on the silent, unacknowledged suffering of one child, you have not built a sanctuary, you have built a prison. And eventually, the prisoner will learn how to pick the lock. For young adults navigating the complex, often guilt-ridden expectations of traditional family roles, Alethea's journey is a masterclass in survival. Society conditioning often dictates that to be a good son or daughter, one must endure endless mistreatment with a forgiving smile. We are taught that self-sacrifice is the highest form of love. Alethea's story violently rejects that notion, offering a crucial paradigm shift. Empathy without boundaries is merely self-destruction. From Alethea, the youth can learn the indispensable value of niluk, resilience, and willpower, combined with trithwe, wisdom. When she realized her family was exploiting her, she did not dissolve into hysterical tears, nor did she engage in screaming matches that would only feed their narrative of her instability. She stepped back. She documented. She transformed her silent suffering into a clinical, undeniable shield. She teaches us that true strength does not lie in enduring abuse forever. It lies in the quiet, methodical preparation required to stop it. Your worth is not defined by how much pain you can absorb for the sake of your family's convenience. You have the right to demand compensation, whether emotional, physical, or financial, for the energy you pour into the people you love. When we observe this tragedy through the perspective of a spiritual seeker, Ngoy Tu Dao, the story transcends a simple legal dispute and becomes a profound commentary on the state of the human soul in modern society. We live in an era where wellness and spirituality are frequently commodified. Barbara adorned herself in linen, drank organic kombucha, and spoke endlessly of cosmic vibrations and chakra alignments, all while systematically stealing a dying woman's life savings to fund designer furniture. This is the ultimate societal hypocrisy. True cultivation of the self, Tu Suat Jin Min, is not an aesthetic. It cannot be purchased at an expensive silent retreat in the mountains. True morality, Dao Duk, is found in the unglamorous, grueling, invisible moments of human existence. It is found in washing a sick elder at 2 a.m. It is found in telling the truth when a lie would be vastly more profitable. A true spiritual path requires us to look inward, to relentlessly audit our own greed, our own selfishness, and our own desire for status. We must cultivate the wisdom to see the world as it truly is, the morality to do what is right, even when it is physically exhausting, and the willpower to stand immovable against the tide of corruption, even when that corruption shares our own bloodline. The antagonists in this story possessed immense material wealth and societal status, yet their souls were utterly bankrupt. In the end, the universe, or the law, stripped them of everything, because a house built on lies cannot stand the harsh light of truth. If stories of profound justice, quiet resilience, and the relentless pursuit of the truth resonate with you, make sure to follow Morning Revenge. We explore the darkest corners of family dynamics and celebrate the quiet warriors who finally hand out the receipts. Join our community and never miss a moment of the reckoning. We are told from the moment we are born that blood is thicker than water. We are indoctrinated with the belief that family is an unbreakable sacred bond, a permanent safety net woven by genetics and shared history. But this conventional wisdom hides a dangerous flaw. It assumes that blood inherently guarantees loyalty. The chilling reality is that sometimes the most dangerous predators do not wait in the dark alleys of a city. They sit across from us at the Thanksgiving table, offering us a second slice of pie while calculating the exact liquidation value of our sanity. Perhaps the truest, highest expression of love is not endless forgiveness. Perhaps true love is the courage to hold a mirror up to the people who raised us, to force them to look at their own monstrous reflections, and to hold them absolutely accountable. We do not destroy our families when we expose their toxic lies. We simply sweep away the ashes of a fire they started themselves. Sometimes, to save your own soul, you must have the cold, terrifying grace to let the people you love dig their own graves, and the absolute peace of mind to let them lie in it.